to check first before I do anything at all. This is actually working. When I tried earlier this evening, oh my goodness, it is working. Yes. Okay. When I tried earlier this evening, it really wasn't working. So I'm going to reread pages that I'm going to read the pages that I didn't like that I had read, but that the other stream ended up. Yeah, my nook is all confused. It just thought I was reading Alchemaster's Apprentice. I was not. I didn't go back to that. Okay. So we're reading to the Black Giants from where we were. Where have you been all this time? I had things to do. Did you release them all? Asked Ushan. I had some help, Rumo replied. Where's Rala? Rolf demanded. Why isn't she here? Rala is dead. Truly? She was tortured to death by someone called General TikTok. I'd hoped I'd find him here. Do you know someone by that name? Rolf burst into tears. The others shook their heads mutely. Where is she? Asked Rolf. Oh goodness, it really is working. I'm so glad. Okay. Two friends of mine are guarding her body. We'll go and get her when we're finished here. Now we must fight. Yes, said Ushan Duluka. Now we must fight. Rumo held his sword in the air to give Crindle and Dandelion a panoramic view of the theater. The soldiers among the audience had left their seats and were streaming towards the exits on their way to the arena. Good heavens, said Dandelion. Man, oh man, Crindle growled. This will be more of a fight than I ever dreamt of. The acoustic servo mechanism. That was the most touching story we've ever heard. Yes, although we got over being touched by anything a long time ago, the third voice merely sobbed. All right, how about it? Asked Smike. Will you help me? Will you show me the way to Rala's heart? Very well, Smike, we'll help you. On one condition. Any condition, as long as it's in my power. What is it? We'll tell you when the time comes, but it might be anything. Are you trying to haggle? He's trying to haggle. Let's get out of here and leave him to stew in his own juice. All right, cried Smike. I'll do whatever you want. Good, because we never haggle. We got over it. We're used to people doing what we tell them. We've got over self-criticism, too. We're infallible. Smike sighed. Very well, let go. Have you thought of a name for yourselves? Yes, we want to be called the non-existent teenies. After all? We've thought it over. Actually, it's a very good name. It's quite an apt description of us. We're so small we hardly exist anymore. The non-existent teenies? Perfect. I want to be called non-existent teenie number 1. I want to be called non-existent teenie number 2. And I want to be called non-existent teenie number 3. That's great, Smike said sarcastically. What do I do first? You must activate the acoustic contentment servo mechanism, said non-existent teenie number 1. You must purr, said the non-existent teenie number 2. And you must purr to our own high standards, said the non-existent teenie number 3. Went Smike. "That's not purring," said non-existent teeny number 1. "That's buzzing," said non-existent teeny number 2. "What do you think you are?" demanded non-existent teeny number 3. "A bumblebee?" Storming the walls, Rumo lowered his sword, and the Woopertines took this as a signal to storm the walls of the arena. They formed living ladders by climbing on each other's shoulders, using their swords and clasped paws as rungs, and dozens of them scaled the barrier within seconds. Panic broke out in the auditorium. A babel of cries went up as the spectators watched to reach the exits. Rolf looked up at the copper killers. A few of them were already firing crossbow bolts into the arena, and the majority had been so taken aback by the Woopertines' sudden appearance that they were still busy cocking their weapons. "I'm going to nab the king," said Rolf. "I'll stay down here," said Ushan. "There's work to be done." The first soldiers were pouring through the gates and into the arena. They far outnumbered the Woopertines and were armed to the teeth. Rolf ran off, intent on clambering over the balustrade into the Mad King's box, the secret stairway. Frithtar reacted swiftly. He had envisioned such emergency 100 times. A revolt was something any royal advisors had to allow for. First he had to calm the gibbering monkey at his side. He put out his hand. The king seized it and sank his teeth into it. Frithtar endured the pain without turning a hair. "What's to be done? What's to be done?" Gornab screamed. "What now?" "Never fear, your majesty. Preparations have been made for such a contingency. After all, I've rehearsed the procedure with you more than once." "I've forgotten it," wailed Gornab. "Close up." Frithtar commanded the royal bodyguards, who promptly formed a dense cordon in front of him and the king. "I can well believe you've forgotten the whole thing, you crazy oaf," thought Frithtar, but he said, "Your majesty has been far too preoccupied with important affairs of state to memorize such triviality. I know. First we open the throne. We put over the throne?" Frithtar released the king's hand and stepped aside. He operated a lever, and throne divided into two halves that slid apart to reveal a stone slab. Then the slab itself slid sideways to reveal a flight of steps leading down into the bowels of the theater. "The spets! The spets!" screeched Gornab, clapping his hands. "So your majesty does remember, after all. I cannot decide on the next move without your approval." Frithtar held up a little roll of paper. "May I issue a Vrahak alert?" Gornab gave a start. "The Havraks? Must we?" "I'm afraid so, your majesty. You've seen how well the Woopertines fight. We must allow for all eventualities. Once Vrahak will suffice, I think. Very well, if it's unavoidable, issue a hawk fra a turtle." "Many thanks, your majesty." Frithtar reached beneath the throne and brought out a small leaden cage. He opened the door, removed a struggling acrobat, and inserted the roll of paper in a capsule attached to its leg. Frithtar released the black creature, whereupon it unfurled its leathery wings, flapped wildly, and soared into the air. "Fly," Gornab called after it. "Fly to the Hawkras." His chief adviser took him by the hand again. "May I, your majesty?" he asked. They turned their backs on the melee in the arena and descended the secret staircase hand in hand. The stone slab closed over the entrance. The two halves of the throne slid together. Now that Frithtar and Gornab had gone, the soldiers dispersed and went off to join the fray. Yukobak's bright idea. Yukobak was standing in the theater's maze of stairways. In his estimation, he had lately displayed courage of the highest order, but he didn't feel called upon to join the fighting in the arena. Unlike Ripple, he had never learnt to wield a weapon. Yukobak thought hard. His greatest asset was his knowledge of the theater's layout. How could he exploit that knowledge for Rebel's benefit? He just had an idea so frightening that he instantly suppressed it. Thrust it back into his brain like a jack-in-the-box that had popped out uninvited, an idea of positively Gornabian dimensions. What madness, forget it. And yet it was crazy, but it would make a tremendous impression. No, far too risky. He himself would probably be its first victim, but then he thought involuntarily of Ripple. Ripple, he had taken on the dangerous task of protecting the Woopertines without a moment's hesitation, whereas he, Yukobak, was cowering in the darkness and shirking his responsibilities. He submitted to his idea to further examination. Yes, it was utterly harebrained, risky, and unpredictable. He drew a deep breath. Then he made his way down to the cellar where the wild beasts were kept. The White Fire. By the time Rolf vaulted over the balustrade of the royal box, the Mad Monarch and his chief adviser had vanished. Instead, he found himself confronted by a detachment of crack troops. 24 of Hell's finest warriors, and all of them itching for a fight. Rolf had prepared himself for this moment again and again in recent days, rehearsing it umpteen times in his head. He would climb into the box, take the king hostage, and compel him to release Rala. It was only now that he truly gasped the fact that there was no Rala to rescue. There wasn't even a king to take revenge on, just 24 black-uniformed soldiers. who drew their swords and advanced on him. A wall of white fire blazed up in front of Rolf. The whole box burst into flames, but it was strange. The flames weren't hot. They were cold. They didn't burn him. They filled him with ice-cold rage. Those of the audience could see what followed, hurriedly looked away, and those who were unable to avert their gaze became witnesses of a relentless massacre. Not only quicker and more ferocious and implacable than any of his foes, Rolf was everywhere at once. He was equipped with a whole arsenal of weapons, and he used every last one, including his teeth. Swords snapped, breastplates splintered, severed limbs went flying, and heart-rending screams rang out wherever he turned. Rolf was in the midst of the white fire, and this time it burned longer and more brightly than usual. When Urs climbed into the box, the royal bodyguard had ceased to exist. All he could do was hold Rolf tight. "You can stop now," he told him. "They're all dead. Crindle enjoys himself at last." Rumo was fighting in the arena back-to-back with Ushan DeLuca. The fencing master hissed again and again, and his blade darted among the soldiers who were falling around him like dismembered puppets. "Do you know what I like best about this place, Rumo?" he shouted. "No," Rumo called back. "The fact that there's no weather." Rumo made no comment. He was too busy to discuss the weather. "A fight," Crindle growled now and then. "A fight at last." "Look out, behind you!" cried Dandelion, and Rumo spun around in time to parry a blow from an axe. "Grim Reaper," Crindle commanded, and Rumo felled the axe-wielding soldier with a stroke indicated. "I owe you an apology," Ushan called. What for?" "I underestimated you, my boy." "Watch your left," cried Dandelion. "A sword stroke, duck." Rumo ducked, and the blade passed over his head. "Counter," ordered Crindle. "Two-handed slice." Rumo performed a downward two-handed slice that cleft the swordsman's helmet in two. "They're giving ground," Dandelion remarked. "So soon?" Crindle was disappointed. It was true. The theater's guards' attack was losing momentum. They had grasped that the Wolvertines were unimpressed by their numerical superiority. The area was littered with soldiers' corpses, whereas most of the Wolvertines were still standing. They turned and fled back into the bowels of the theater. Rumo looked up at the auditorium. Panic-stricken members of the public were screaming, blocking the exits, falling over and trampling each other. The Wolvertines had infiltrated them like a swarm of angry bees, omnipresent and dangerous. Spreading out across the rows of seats, they attacked the soldiers and terrified the spectators by their mere presence. The Hellings, who were the most panic-stricken of all, pushed and jostled and trampled their own kind to death. Never been so close to a fight before. They now, for the first time, got some idea of what it was like to fear for one's life. The copper killers didn't know where to aim. The Wolvertines were darting around so swiftly among the maddened spectators. Although they occasionally fired at random into the crowd, they hit more allies than enemies. Rumo wiped his sword on a dead soldier's cloak. This wasn't victory, it was only the start of the battle. The theater of death had been shaken to its foundations, but Rumo was determined to go on shaking until hell itself caved in. He would do so for Ralla's sake. Smike stopped purring. The electrical hum died away. The submarine came to a halt. Inside the heart. "Are we there?" he asked. "No," said the non-existent teeny number 1. "We're inside the heart, though," said non-existent teeny number 2. "So why have we stopped? We thought we heard something. In here, everything's dead." "Yes, we were probably mistaken. I thought you were infallible." "Yes, that's the worrying thing. If we think we heard something, we heard something. But we can't hear it anymore." "Good, then we can go on," said Smike. "One moment," said non-existent teeny number 1. "There's an important decision to be made," said non-existent teeny number 2. "One we must leave to you. It's a matter of life and death." "I know," said Smike. "Rella's life is at stake." "Not only hers." "What do you mean?" "Your life is also at stake now." "How so? Is something wrong?" "We've noticed that our propellers are finding it harder and harder to turn." "It's the coagulation. The more the blood congeals, the harder it gets." "Meaning what?" "Meaning that we'll make it to your destination and make it back as well, if the operation succeeds, because then the plasma will thin again. If the operation fails and the blood solidifies, we won't be able to budge an inch. This submarine will become your coffin, imprisoned in clotted blood." Smite gave an involuntary gulp. "At this stage, we could still make it back. We only wanted to tell you. It's up to you. We can still turn around." Smite deliberated. "What, in your estimation, are the chances of the operation succeeding?" "The same as in any risky venture, 50-50. "You mean it's a gamble?" "You could put it that way. Let's gamble in." "As you wish, Smite. Would you please start purring again?" An excellent motto. The spectators' screams, the clash of swords, and cries of pain drifting over from the theater of death had convinced Fribble and the elder Wolvertines that Rumo's rescue attempt had been crowned with success. Having overpowered the soldiers and appropriated their weapons, they were now standing around irresolutely. "They're hard at it," said Fribble. "Can you hear that din?" "Better than you can, probably," said Mayor Jowly of Gloomberg. We're Wolpertines, old we may be, but we aren't hard of hearing. What ought we do?" "Go over there and join in," said the mayor, but Rumo said to stay here. But we were unarmed when he said that. Things have changed. Jowly turned to the other Wolpertines. "What do you think, my friends? Are we too old to fight?" "Of course we are," said Oga Abdulsgard, brandishing a club. "So let's go before we die of senile decay." "What do you think?" Jowly asked Ribble. The homunculus raised his spear. "We're as good as dead," he said, "but they haven't buried us yet." "An excellent motto," said the mayor. "Is it yours?" "No," Ribble replied. "I got it from a good friend of mine." The wild beasts. "I'm as good as dead," thought Yucca, "but they haven't buried me yet." What had prompted this idea of releasing some wild beasts into the theater of death, common sense or insanity? Even if one simply discounted that question, another two considerably more practical questions remained. Which wild beasts should he release, and how many? Yucca had seen a dozen doors. It would be far too risky to open them all. Of that he was sure. He decided to leave it at 3. 3 exotic and unpredictable creatures should be enough to create chaos. So which doors should he open? He had a vivid recollection of the cell containing the ruby-red spider. Although he dreaded releasing such a monster, it had to be. The rest would leave to chance. He would fling open 2 doors at random, and run like the wind. Heart-pounding, Yucca stole up the door beyond which lurked the giant spider. Was it asleep? Was it awake? Was he only waiting for the person who had recently appeared in the doorway to be stupid enough to do it a second time? He drew a deep breath. Then resolutely he drew the big rusty bolt and wrenched the door open. Without looking inside, he hurried on to the adjacent cell. Its evil-smelling occupant greeted him with a bestial snarl. But he was already opening the door after the next. Then he sprinted to the stairs, ran up them a little way, and turned to see what he had done. The huge spider had already emerged from its cell. It revolved around the spot and flapped its moth-like wings, clearly trying to get its bearings in these new surroundings. Behind it, the neighboring cell disgorged an albino rat the size of a crocodile with red claws and a long red tail. The blind creature had white, yard-long antennae spreading from the places in its head where normal rat eyes would have been. It emitted an angry snarl, bared its yellow sickle-shaped teeth, and cracked its tail like a whip. From the third door emerged a crystal scorpion, a denizen of the Frigida caves, an immense insect 15 or 20 feet long. It was altogether transparent, with a body that seemed to consist entirely of razor-sharp edges and corners. Yucca had heard of this life form in his biology lessons. Mere contact with its icy exterior could inflict injuries which paradoxically resembled third-degree burns. The scorpion sliced the air with its claws and raised its glassy sting, which could inject a venom that turned its victims to ice within seconds. 3 of the netherworld's most dangerous creatures, and Yucca had unleashed them. As if mesmerized, he continued to stand watching them from the stairs. The giant spider had completed its inspection. It flexed its legs, and ruby-red fur bristled. Then, wildly flapping its moth-like wings, it rose into the air. Yucca awoke from his stupor. The fearsome insect was fluttering straight for him with its legs dangling. It had obviously decided that of all creatures in its vicinity, the little 2-legged helling would be the easiest to encase in a cocoon. Yucca bounded up the stairs 3 at a time. Gornab's refuge. Gornab, crouching in one corner of the crudely constructed cell, stared at Frictar in dismay. His chief advisor had conducted him to a chamber beneath the theater that didn't officially exist. Its door was indistinguishable from the brick wall of the passage outside, and Frictar had personally poisoned the laborers who had built it. The terrified king had abandoned his heirs and graces and placed himself in Frictar's hands. It had never occurred to him that there might be a rebellion, still less that he might lose his throne. Events had overtaken him so suddenly that he now resembled a helpless, frightened child. "Your Majesty will be absolutely safe here, no matter what happens," Frictar said soothingly. "This chamber's existence is unknown to anyone but the 2 of us. The food and medicine stored here will last for weeks. All has been prepared for your comfort and convenience." He pointed to a table laden with fruit and cheese, bread, and wine. "But why are he bathing like Tish?" wailed Gornab. "It's forbidden, surely?" "Yes, such behavior in the theater of death is forbidden, and believe me, your Majesty, we shall punish all who have dared to take up arms against you." "Yes, nuppish them," Gornab demanded. "Nuppish them unceremonially." "We will, your Majesty, unmercifully, and without exception. I must go upstairs now to see that all is well. I shall report on the situation in due course. Perhaps you would care to sleep for a while. It would refresh you. You'll find medicines and wine on the table." "Dug idea," said Gornab, waddling over to the table with the drugs on it. "Alice will do me dug." In that case, I wish you sweet dreams. Doubtless all will be back to normal by the time you wake up refreshed. Frithtar pressed the brick that opened the secret door. He went out and closed it behind him. For one brief titillating moment he toyed with the idea of leaving the moronic dwarf to rot in there. He could simply wedge the door shut and bury him alive. It was an attractive notion, except that because he was the last person to have been seen in the king's company, suspicion would immediately fall on him. He drew a deep breath. Gornab was safe. Now to regain control of those Wolpertines, how had they managed to escape from their cells, and where had that confounded General TikTok got to just when he was needed the most? General TikTok's grief. General TikTok's grief had steadily intensified. It was devouring him like a vulture, tearing at his vitals again and again. He would never have thought himself capable of such an emotion. He didn't know how long he'd spent in the weaponsmith's workshop, disemboweling himself with the diamond-toothed pliers, in search for the mysterious something deep inside that was causing him so much pain. He had cut open his armor-plated chest, broken his steel ribs, and destroyed many a lethal mechanism hidden within him, but all to no avail. The thing he sought seemed as nimble, as clever, and cunning as Rolla had been. It was like an elusive, intangible, mocking will-o'-the-wisp. At last he abandoned his quest. Hurling the pliers away, he uttered a bellow of rage. Rage, yes, rage was all he had left. He yearned to fight, he yearned to destroy, he yearned to kill. General TikTok set off for the theater of death. This was a dark day, and he would do his utmost to ensure that it ended with an even darker note. In the heart of the heart, the subcutaneous submarine had stopped again. "Where are we?" asked Smike. "We're there," said non-existent teeny number 1. "We penetrated the aorta. We're in the heart of the heart," said the non-existent teeny number 2. "Normally, this is where the life of life goes on," said non-existent teeny number 3. "At the moment, though, nothing at all is going on." "I've never seen a deader heart. Someone has really done a job on it. Yes, someone who was trying to improve on death, and he succeeded. So what do we do now?" asked Smike. "Now comes the precision work. We're looking for the connectors, 6 microscopically small connectors, an amylorican adapter, a hallucinogenic synapse, an opabiniatic membrane, an Naboquavian knob, Naboquavian knob, an epithalamian egress, an odontoid tube. "I see," said Smike. "And you plug your instruments into them, do you?" "Exactly. The auritic instruments of the non-existent teenies, the world's smallest but most effective surgical instruments." "And what happens then?" Smike asked. "First we must find the connectors." "That's difficult enough. They're even smaller than we are." "Can you imagine that?" "No, you can't," Smike sighed. "If we find them, which isn't a foregone conclusion, we administer an auritic shock. Then you'd better cross your fingers. But now you must do a bit more purring. By all means, to boost the submarine's power supply or something." "No, to shut you up. We need to concentrate. The ruby-red monster." The theater was emptying rapidly. The rows of seats were still occupied by panic-stricken members of the public, but someone had obviously ordered the soldiers to clear the auditorium. Rolf and Urs had rejoined Rumo and Ushan de Luca in the arena, together with Oleg of the Dunes, Vasco of the Red Forest, Bala of Bettyville. They were trying to work out a communal plan of action. "Sooner or later, those galleries will empty," said Ushan. "All they need to do then is seal the exits, and those crossbowmen will be able to mow us down. We must get out of here." Oleg of the Dunes was busy prodding soldiers with his sling. "We ought to climb up into their gallery," he said between shots. "Wipe them out, and then we won." "They can't be wiped out," Urs objected. "They're made of metal. It'd be suicide." A sudden cry rang through the theater. It sounded even more frantic and terrified than the shouts in the rows of seats overhead. Yukabat came running into the arena, screeching and waving his arms. "Help!" he shouted. "Rumo, help me!" Wolpertines, the soldiers, the copper killers, all stopped short. Their attention had abruptly been claimed by a monster that came scuttling through the gate behind him on long, agile legs. On seeing all the creatures around it, the giant spider came to a halt and turned on the spot. Its wings were quivering excitedly. Yukabak dashed up to Rumo and his companions, panting hard. "This is Yukabak," said Rumo. "He helped me to release the prisoners." "Delighted to make your acquaintance," Ushan said with a courteous bow. "But tell me, Yukabak, what's this you brought with you?" Nonchalantly he pointed his sword at the monster, whose jaws were dripping with purulent saliva. It's a spider, said Yuko, sheltering behind Rumo's back. A huge spider with wings. Some idiot must have let it out. No idea who. The Black Giants. Ripple was marching to the theater of death with his small but determined band of elderly Wolpertons. Suddenly, as they rounded a corner, they found their way barred by a phalanx of unfamiliar figures. Ripple had never seen their like in hell before. Immensely tall, they were cowled and swathed from head to foot in black cloaks. There must have been hundreds of them, all armed with absurdly large weapons, including axes, swords, and nail-studded clubs, and the moldy smell they gave off was reminiscent of an exhumed coffin. Ripple and the Wolpertons prepared to fight. The leader of the strange warriors, a gigantic fellow carrying an even more gigantic scythe, raised an arm. Hey, you dogs, he called in a deep, booming voice. Are you Wolpertons? If so, you must surely know where we can find that idiot Rumo. You're looking for Rumo? Asked Jowly. He stepped forward and gripped the hilt of his sword, ready to do battle. What do you want with him? We want to help him, boomed the Black Giant. If I know him, he's in trouble. Ripple joined the mayor. We're also on our way to help him. Who are you? We're the dead Yetis. The giant growled and threw back his cowl to reveal the black death's head beneath. Ripple and Wolpertons retreated a step. Don't be alarmed, said the giant. We're not quite as dead as we look. My name is Scullop the Scyther. I'm here because something occurred to me. What would that be, Scullop the Scyther? Asked Jowly. None of your business, Scullop replied. I can only tell Rumo that. Well, how about it? Do you know where I can find him? Can you fight? Asked Ripple. Scullop turned to his warriors. What do you think, men? Can we fight? No, shouted a Yeti in the rear rank. Tick-tock funks a farewell. The time seemed ripe for General Tick-tock's attempt to anesthetize his pain with rage and drown his sorrow in blood, for hell was in utter chaos. The nearer he got to the theater of death, the more numerous the wounded, screaming, panic-stricken citizens and soldiers he encountered. Tick-tock didn't care if the city went up in flames. If Gornab devoured Friftar, the whole of Netherworld, and went back to ruin. Any suffering that distracted him from his own was a source of satisfaction. First, he needed some weapons, better ones that were concealed in his armor-plated body. He needed the huge weapons he had commissioned to meet his personal requirements. General Tick-tock headed for his tower. What a difference a few hours could make. When he had set off for the weaponsmith's workshop, hell was still wrapped in slumber, but now pandemonium reigned. Excellent. The sound of fighting was coming from the theater of death, and it wasn't the usual clatter of a dozen swords. It was the genuine din of battle. General Tick-tock entered the tower. He armed himself with a huge black axe and massive sword that had been forged for him from Netherworld ore. His favorite weapons, none of your technological falderals, just plain razor-sharp metal. No better instruments of death existed. He paused for a moment. Should he go upstairs for one last look at Rala and the Metal Maiden? He hadn't even bidden her farewell. An unwelcome intruder. We've got some news for you, Smike, said non-existent teeny number 1. Good news and bad news, said non-existent teeny number 2. What? Smike had almost dozed off, lulled to sleep by his own purring, the subcutaneous submarine's electrical hum. First, the good news, we found the connectors. Really? That's great, let's get started then. One moment, now comes the bad news. The connectors are being guarded. Guarded? Smike said drowsily, stretching. Look through the membrane. Smike rubbed his eyes and peered through the glassy membrane. What he saw outside jolted him awake at last. What on earth is that? He exclaimed. That's just what we were wondering, remarked the non-existent teeny number 1. But before we could work out what it was, it looked different, said non-existent teeny number 2. It keeps on changing shape and color, said non-existent teeny number 3. It's incomprehensible. Incomprehensible is a perfectly apt description of the creature that was floating outside Rala's motionless bloodstream. It was forever changing its hideous appearance and unattractive coloration, and from inside it came a series of clicks like those made by a dislocated joint. What is it? Smike asked dully. We're still working on an answer to that question, said non-existent teeny number 1. The peculiar organism changed color again, emitted another click, and exuded a cloud of black slime. That's the sound we heard earlier. We really are infallible. So life exists in this dead world after all. We suspect it's a disease. The disease that wrought all this havoc. A disease, said Smike. What's a disease doing in a dead body? The fearsome apparitions, Tychon's little surprise. The fearsome apparitions Mike saw through the membrane was a surprise originally intended not for him but for General TikTok. Ralla's congealing blood contained a treacherous little special ingredient, which Typhon Xiphus had added to his subcutaneous suicide squad, a last-ditch regard. When the alchemist's work on the subcutaneous suicide squad was already far advanced, he had had a flash of inspiration. If I'm creating a disease of the utmost virulence, Tychon had told himself, why shouldn't I equip it with all the trimmings? The disease was already virulent enough to be rated the worst disease in existence. It was painful, lethal, exceptionally infectious, and incurable. All it couldn't do was something no disease had ever managed to do, remain infectious after it had left a body. Tychon, who had long ago come to regard his creation as a sort of commando unit, had dreamt up a special refinement, a rearguard to be left behind in the victim's body just in case someone tried to resuscitate it. In devising the subcutaneous suicide squad, he had created a unique disease, one that could defend the havoc it had wrought once the job was done. Smike, called the non-existent teeny number 1. Are you all right, Smike? Asked non-existent teeny number 2. Smike eyed the strange clicking creature as if it were an evil spirit. What was it capable of? Could it really prevent the operation? It looked capable of anything, he had to admit, capable of changing shape to suit any requirement in this microscopic world. It looked invincible. It was the new ruler of Ralla's body. What do we do now? Smike asked. Listen, Smike, said non-existent teeny number 1. Now comes the really unpleasant part. What's that? You must get out and kill that thing. You're joking. No, Smike, we never joke. We got over our sense of humor a long time ago, as you know. It's just not on. I can't. Don't you remember our agreement? Asked non-existent teeny number 2. What agreement? Forgotten already? Said non-existent teeny number 3. You said you'd do whatever we wanted. Yes, I remember. And you know what, Smike? No, what? We won't even ask you to do us this favor. No, there's no need. You're doing it anyway. You'll have to get out and kill that thing. It's your only hope for survival. The torture chamber. General TikTok lumbered over to the stairs and laid his weapons down on the bottom step. Up there was the metal maiden, with Ralla's dead body inside it. He put his foot on the bottom step. His life's work and his great love, yes, he must bid them farewell. He mounted the second step. His greatest triumph and his only love, both destroyed by his own hands. The pain in his vitals had started to throb again. Ralla, 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 it went. He continued to climb the stairs. The pain became more unbearable with every step. Death, which the metal maiden was supposed to overcome, had triumphed after all. It was more unfathomable and unpredictable than ever. This was his greatest defeat. Ralla, Ralla, Ralla. He reached the torture chamber. The door was ajar. He had only to push it open and he would see her in the relentless embrace of Typhon Xiphus to seize. Who could tell what she looked like now? He remembered the alchemist's own terrible death, his rapid decomposition. He gripped the door handle and pulled it shut. No sight of Ralla would be too much for him. Never again. He would come back later and burn the tower to the ground. First there was killing to be done. General TikTok turned and went downstairs again. Retrieving his weapons, he went over to the secret passage that led to the theater of death. He would show Frithtar, his crazy king, what a real fight looked like. Better still, he would teach them the meaning of war. The spider. Did you do this? Rumo asked Yuka so quietly that the others couldn't hear. Did you let that monster out? No, Yuka whispered it out. I let 3 monsters out. The spider is still turning on its spindly legs and fluttering its moth-like wings, seemingly unable to decide which of these countless tidbits to devote its attention to. All the Woopertings had leveled their weapons at it, but none of them dared to attack. Even Olek, who was slowly swinging his sling, hesitated. Up in their gallery, the copper killers also seemed to be waiting. Why bother to open fire with this? Monster might do the job for them and devour a few Woopertings. For the moment, the spider seemed to be the new master of the theater of death. All at once began to flap its great wings. Dust swirled in all directions as it rose into the air with a ferocious hiss and fluttered across the arena. High above the heads of Rumo, Yukabak, Ushan, Rolf, and his friends, It made a straight for the spectators' seats, circled one, and swooped on a knot of shoving, jostling pilings near one of the exits. "It seems to be on our side," said Yukovac, averting his eyes, for the moment at least. The copper killers fired another volley of crossbow bolts into the arena, and it was all the Wolvertines could do to protect themselves with the shields and armor they had taken from the dead. The theater guards continued to hold the arena gates, but made no immediate move to resume the attack. "Our best bet is to break out and fight on outside the theater," Ushan shouted again. "The spectators' exits are still choked," Urs called back, "and the gates are blockaded. We can't get out of the arena. We're trapped." "Then all we can do is wait for a miracle," said Yukovac. They all took cover as another volley of crossbow bolts came raining down on them. Yetis and Wolvertines. Ripple had led the Wolvertines and Yetis into the sewer system beneath the theater of death. Muffled sounds of fighting could be heard even down there, and the screams of dying sent ghostly echoes speeding along the maze of tunnels. The stench beneath the theater was appalling. Everything was so dumped into the sewers. Not only the spectators' rubbish, but the dung of the wild beasts and also dead bodies. Gnawed skeletons were lying everywhere, and many of the streams through which the warriors waded were red with blood. Cackarbats and other carrion eaters scuttled between their legs as they marched along. "You said you'd take us to a theater," growled Scallop the Scyther, who was leading the little army with Ribble and Mayor Jowly, "and we're wading through a cesspit." "Come on, we're going to hell. That's what Scallop told us," cried one of the Yetis behind them. "Another of his crazy ideas." The other Yetis laughed derisively. "They don't mean it," Scallop growled. "They're really having a whale of a time." "It's not much further," Ribble told him. "The shafts leading up into the theater are just around the next bend. We can climb up into any row of seats we like." "Let's go right up to the top then," said Scallop. "We'll be able to see everything from there." "But that's where the Copper Killers are." "The Copper Killers? Who are they?" "The most fearsome warriors in hell." "Huh," said Scallop. "You're scaring me. The Copper Killers are really dangerous," Ribble insisted. "They're reputed to be immortal." "Well," said Scallop, "so are we, reputedly." Some of the Yetis laughed. "You really mean to take them on?" asked Ribble. "You heard, little un," Scallop growled. "I'd be known for my good ideas." The Crystal Scorpion. When General Tick-Tock emerged from his secret passage into one of the theater's underground corridors, axe and sword in hand, he was confronted by a creature at least as weird-looking as himself. It was an enormous scorpion with huge claws and a sting raised to strike. Its truly extraordinary feature wasn't its vast size, however, but the fact that its body was as transparent as polished crystal. "What on earth is a Crystal Scorpion doing down here?" General Tick-Tock asked himself. "This place must really be tucked in chaos if they let the most dangerous wild beast run around loose." He took a step towards the monster. Without a moment's hesitation, the scorpion lashed out at Tick-Tock with its icy sting, which simply bounced off his metal exterior. The monster recoiled in astonishment. The general didn't budge an inch. "You're a dangerous and very beautiful creature," Tick-Tock said approvingly, "but you've picked on the wrong opponent. To be precise, Tick, you couldn't have picked on a worse opponent in the whole of hell. Go and find yourself, Tock, another one before you make a real enemy of me." He brandished his sword like someone shooing away a troublesome insect. Quick as a flash, the scorpion fastened one of its claws on Tick-Tock's arm. There was a loud clang as crystal met metal. Sighing, Tick-Tock severed the scorpion's claw from its body with one mighty blow of his axe and sent it crashing to the flagstones. A moment later, a sword came down plumb on the scorpion's head. With a sound like breaking glass, the monster disintegrated and fell to the ground in smithereens. General Tick-Tock strode heedlessly over its remains, which crunched beneath his feet like crushed ice. "What on earth's the matter with me?" the general said to himself. "Expecting a creature made of crystal to listen to reason is as futile as looking for a heart in my metal body." On reaching the top of the theater, he encountered another annoying creature, the slimy individual named Friptar, who stood between him and the king. He resisted the impulse to kill him on the spot. Friptar stared at the general with his mouth open, astonished to see his chest torn open and his metal ribs bent outwards. But he asked no questions and informed him of the Wolvertines' revolt. Tick-Tock greeted the news as imperturbably as if Friptar had asked what he'd had for breakfast. "I see," said Tick-Tock. "A rebellion, Tick. I shall crush it, Tock. Anything else?" "No, Friptar said with a smile. "That's all, just a little rebellion." "Off you go," Tick-Tock barked at him. "Off you go, Tick, and hide with your king, Tock, until it's all over." "Very good," Friptar replied obsequiously and hurried off. So the Wolpertines had rebelled, no serious cause for concern. He himself was worth a whole army. He could crush a revolt by a couple of hundred rampaging slaves on his own without the aid of his copper killers. He had a job to do, good, a job that required him to kill, all the better. His body had steadily grown since his arrival in hell, becoming ever stronger, ever more deadly and invulnerable. In addition, he was suffering from grief and despair. If transmuted into rage and directed against the enemy, those were weapons of inestimable value. Hell was about to witness an orgy of death and destruction unprecedented in the history of Netherworld. Frithar plans a show trial. Although he couldn't account for either of them, Frithar felt that TikTok's appearance and the state of affairs inside its mysterious tower were connected in some way. The general had resembled a gutted chicken, but it didn't seem to have done him much harm. On the contrary, it made him look more dangerous still, like a wild beast whose wounds had increased his unpredictability. Frithar recapitulated. The king was in a safe place, the Vrahawk alert had been issued, the Wolpertines were trapped, and General TikTok had returned to restore order. Everything seemed to be returning to normal. In his mind's eye, he was already organizing a show trial destined to be one of the most magnificent productions he had ever staged at the Theater of Death. If only it weren't for his numb sensation in his bones. Sometimes he felt cold, sometimes hot, and sometimes unaccountably queasy. Whenever the pandemonium subsided, which it very seldom did, Frithar seemed to hear a series of faint, rhythmical clicks inside his head. He shook himself and reapplied his mind to the present situation. He must find himself a secret vantage point from which to watch the General TikTok's performance in the arena. His one regret was that the greatest fight ever staged at the Theater of Death would take place before an almost non-existent audience. Smite's unsavory past. The rear guard of the subcutaneous suicide squad rotated on the spot, emitting clouds of little black bubbles. Smite turned away in disgust. "Why me?" he yelled at the walls of the subcutaneous submarine. "Why do I always wind up in situations like this? What have I done to deserve it? You aren't asking us because you expect an answer, do you?" Non-existent teeny number one retorted. Smike was surprised by his arch tone of voice. "What do you mean?" he demanded. "We know everything, Smike." "Meaning what?" "Meaning everything about you. About me. What is there to know about me? You really want an example?" "Yes, now that you've aroused my curiosity. Well, for one thing, we know you used to referee the Fang's professional boxing matches and were a military advisor during the Northlanders' guerrilla wars. You were also an officially licensed second at duels between Florenthian aristocrats and a timekeeper at the Wolpertines chess tournaments in Betaville, not to mention an organizer of cockfights, the treasurer of the Simonian Firmizblucht, a cheerleader at the Midgardian dwarf jousts, and a croupier at Fort Una. Smike gave a puzzled laugh. "Hey, you really do know a lot about me. Can you read people's thoughts?" "Of course we can, Smike. That's why we also know what you're hiding in your chamber of memories, what's concealed beneath that black cloth." Smike broke out in a sweat. He never told anyone about the chamber of memories, not even Rumo. "We've known all about you ever since you set foot in our submarine. Nobody's allowed to board it unless they've been thoroughly screened. We're suspicious by nature, Smike. We got over trusting people a long time ago. What do you know about the Chamber of Memories?" Smike demanded earnestly. "We know, for instance, what's under the cloth," said the non-existent teeny number one. "It's a picture," said non-existent teeny number two. "It's a picture of Lindworm Castle, isn't it, Smike?" said non-existent teeny number three. Smike drew a deep breath. He didn't reply. "What's the matter, Smike? Run out of glib answers?" "Live answers?" "I don't know what you're talking about," Smike said half-heartedly. You were there. You were there in Lindworm Castle. What's more, Smike, you changed its appearance forever. It was you that stained Lindworm Castle red." "That's not true," Smike exclaimed. "Nobody knows. Yes, nobody knows, but you knows that you were the leader of the Smarmies, who organized the peaceful siege of Lindworm Castle, so-called. A splendid plan, Smike, truly brilliant. You used to own the tavern patronized by all the mercenaries who had besieged the castle in vain. You were the one who pretended to want to publish the Lindworm's poems. You captured Lindworm Castle. Congratulations, a strategic masterstroke. What gives you the right to pry around in my memories? Come, Smike. Do you really think we'd perform such a complicated operation with the aid of someone who didn't have a holdover? Someone with a clear conscience? We don't need someone heroic for a job like this, only someone desperate." Smike felt breathless. Was it only his imagination, or was the air on board running out? "Admit it, Smike. You stained Lindworm Castle red with blood, so much blood that only blood may be able to wash it off. You ought to take a bath, Smike. A bath in Raleigh's blood." The curse of Lindworm Castle. Smike didn't answer for a long time. Nothing could be heard but his heavy breathing. The non-existent teenies said nothing neither. I was a different person in those days," Smike said at last. "I was young, I made mistakes, and I paid for them. I paid for them on Roaming Rock. That's not good enough, Smike, or you wouldn't be here now. You attract misfortune the way a magnet attracts iron fillings. There's a curse on you, Smike, the curse of Lindworm Castle." "What shall I do?" Smike asked desperately. "That's the right question for once," said non-existent teeny number 1. "You've hit the nail on the head," said non-existent teeny number 2. "You must do something. You must fight," said non-existent teeny number 3. "For the first time in your life, you yourself must fight instead of getting other people to do it for you." When Ribble reached the Copper Killer's gallery with the Wolpertines and Yetis, Scarlet beside her assumed command. "You and the Wolpertines take a back seat for the moment," Scarlet whispered. "We'll be going at it hammer and tongs in a minute. Just relax and watch the fun." Silently he gave the signal to attack. The Copper Killers, who were busy shooting at the Wolpertines, were caught unawares when the Yetis attacked them from the rear, but they swiftly drew their side arms and concentrated on the new enemy. What followed was the most ferocious fight the Theater of Death had ever witnessed. Clubs, swords, huge iron hammers, scythes, and axes crashed together, striking showers and sparks that lit up the auditorium. Ribble, Mayor Jowly, and the other Wolpertines stood aside and watched the battle, half mesmerized, half fascinated. The Copper Killer's gallery resembled an ironworks. Metal clanged against metal, steel splinters flew, and the warriors grunted with exertion as they fought with might and main. Had Ribble or one of the others gotten in the way, they would have been crushed like beetles. The homunculus saw 3 Yetis corner a Copper Killer and proceed to destroy him with tireless devotion to duty. No matter how often their swords and axes bounced off his metal body, they raised him again and showered him with blows like blacksmiths beating out a sheet of iron. They hammered all the way at the Copper Killer until Ribble saw the first screws fly from his helmet, whereupon they attacked him with redoubled ferocity. Scarlet came up to Ribble. "And they're supposed to be immortal?" he shouted, indicating the metal warriors with a huge scythe. "We'll see about that. You asked if my men could fight. Take a look at them, little one, and tell me what you think." "They fight well," Ribble shouted back, nodding with alacrity. "Very well. And they're dead, darn it, dead. Can you imagine how well they fought when they were still alive? No, little one, you can't." Scarlet Scyther plunged back into the fray. He shoved a Copper Killer so hard in the chest he fell backwards over the gallery rail. "Fight, men," he bellowed, "fight." "Shut up, Scarlet," one of the Yetis called back. "What do you think we're doing right now?" The Yetis go into action. Rumo and the other Wolpertines had been poised to attempt a breakout just before Ushan DeLuca could give the order. An incredible commotion erupted in the Copper Killer's gallery high overhead. They all looked up. Sparks came showering over the rail. Weapons clashed and shouts rang out. Some gigantic figures in black hooded cloaks had materialized among the metallic soldiers and were fiercely engaging them in battle. One especially huge black warrior was swinging a scythe. Others fought with clubs and axes, swords, and hammers. The force with which the weapons collided made the whole auditorium shake. Even the red spider, which was just cocooning its last few screaming victims, interrupted its work and focused its numerous eyes on what was happening in the Copper Killer's gallery. "What's going on up there?" asked Urs. "Who are those fellows?" Rumo shook his head in disbelief. "I know who they are," he said. "They're the dead Yetis." General TikTok's challenge. General TikTok entered the arena of the Theater of Death through the largest gateway. He would really have liked a standing ovation, this being his first appearance there for ages, but personal vanity was irrelevant. This was a demonstration of power. His dejected spirits rose at the sight of battles raging in the arena and auditorium. Wolpertines versus soldiers, Wolpertines versus Hellings, showers of spears and crossbow bolts, spectators trampling each other to death, his Copper Killers battling with a contingent of black-clad giants up in the gallery. Wonderful! He could even see the monstrous red spider, the one they'd caught in Gornab's echo, devouring some screaming spectators. What a picturesque bonus! How the sparks were flying, how the iron sang. It was a battlefield of the First Order. Oh, how he'd missed the taste of war. Striding into the arena over a carpet of dead bodies, General TikTok raised his axe and sword in salute. The mercenaries and theater guards regained their courage when they saw the general enter. They left the barricaded gateways and charged into the arena, cheering him enthusiastically. The Wolpertines stared in wonder at the huge machine that came clanking into the arena like a god of vengeance, bristling with weapons. The mere presence of the biggest and most deadly of the Copper Killers boosted the Hellions' troops' morale and disconcerted their enemies in a way to which TikTok was accustomed after so many battles in the past. In the middle of the arena he halted, lowered his steel jaw, and emitted a gurgle. Then came a sound like gravel crunching underfoot, and sparks spewed from his mouth, followed by a jet of flame yards long. He bent over the nearest Wolperting and set him ablaze. The burning mixture of acid and oil vaporized him into a cloud of black smoke that swiftly rose and disappeared into the darkness above the theater. TikTok straightened up, threw back his cloak, and bared his mutilated chest. His jaw snapped shut, his shoulders gave a jerk, and two rotating circular saw blades shot out from between his steel ribs. They went whirring across the arena in a wide arc, compelling many of the Wolpertings to leap aside, and then returned to the TikTok's chest like boomerangs. Still rotating, they re-entered it, and noisily came to rest inside him. TikTok reached a small group of Wolpertings in three giant strides. Two of them he felled in a flash with his sword and axe. The third, caught by the flat of the huge axe, went sailing through the air and landed many feet away. The general sheathed his sword and slowly turned on the spot, apparently debating what to do next. He raised his head and stared at something high up in the auditorium. Drawing back his arm, he hurled the axe with incredible force. It soared upwards, turning over and over as it hissed through the air and landed smack in the middle of the huge spider's body. The monster uttered a last terrible howl and collapsed on top of its cocooned victims. All hostilities in the arena and the auditorium had been suspended. Everyone was concentrating on the general's impressive entrance. The only place where the fighting continued unabated was up at the Copper Killer's gallery. TikTok stomped over to the warrior, who was unlucky enough to be nearest him. Although he happened to be a theater guard, TikTok seized him by the throat, picked him up like a rag doll, and hurled him across the field of battle. The man's bones shattered as he hit the ground. "You want to fight?" yelled the mightiest Copper Killer of all, and his voice rang through the theater of death. "You want war? Then come to me. I am General TikTok. I am war in person." So that's General TikTok, thought Ushan DeLuca. His entrance had indeed been impressive. He was big, he was strong, he was clearly well armed. He could spit fire like a dragon. He could project saw blades from his chest. And he knew how to handle a sword and axe. He looked invulnerable and implacable. He was a whole army and a fortress on legs combined, so why wasn't Ushan impressed? The fencing master's euphoria had attained a pitch he would never have thought possible. He had mowed down opponents like weeds. He was the swiftest, most elegant, and deadly swordsman in the arena. Rawl's vengeful fury and Rumo's natural aptitude were nothing beside Ushan's abilities. Beside his unique combination of talent and years-long experience, pugnacity, and tactical skill, but there was another respect in which Ushan surpassed every other Wolperting: his readiness to die. Ever since he had commanded Rolf and Urs to kill him, it was as if he had pushed open an invisible door from which boundless energy flowed into him. And now this Copper Killer had entered the arena. This megalomaniac machine had not only slain friends and pupils of his, but claimed to be war personified. General TikTok? Wasn't that the name Rumo had mentioned? Wasn't it he who had tortured and killed Rala? Yes, he looked dangerous. He looked as if he embodied the evil of a whole army of murderers, as if he could take on any warrior in the theater, Ushan DeLuca included. Smike's oceanic ancestry. Yes, Smike told himself, this must be it. I thought I reached it on Roaming Rock when I was imprisoned in my slimy pool, but I was wrong. It's only now, here and now, that my life has reached its lowest ebb. I'm immersed in blood, in dead diseased blood. Now pull yourself together, Smike, said non-existent teeny number 1. Try to pretend it's water, said non-existent teeny number 2. Blood consists largely of water, said non-existent teeny number 3. Hey, thought Smike, I can hear you out here as well. We're the non-existent teenies, Smike. You've no idea how many places you could hear us if we wanted to. If we wanted you to. How are you feeling, Smike? Smike had left the submarine. He had passed through the hull like a disembodied spirit. That was the only explanation he could find for the way he had got from the inside to the outside without opening a door of any kind. That explanation is not entirely apt, Smike. It was a case of molecular transference with the aid of sympathetic vibrations. We gave up doors a long time ago. Smike had instinctively switched over to gill breathing. I'm breathing blood, he thought. I'm breathing dead blood. Do stop going on about blood. It's an absolute obsession. Concentrate on your opponent. Smike's opponent was floating high above him, just in front of a place where the non-existent heat supposed the connectors required for their auric operation to be located. The creature turned itself inside out, rotated on its own axis, or excreted some slime, turned transparent, then dark gray and black in turn, as if steadfastly intent on demonstrating how dangerous it was. Now listen, Smike, said non-existent T number 1. We've made the following discovery. It's a fatal disease, that bad, but it can't infect you. Can't it? No, it can only infect the body whose bloodstream it's in. It's a question of relative size. What's more, it's the last example of its kind in the organism, that much we do know. Good. But what? This disease could kill you just the same. It certainly looks that way. It could kill you quite simply by using physical violence. That too is a question of relative size. But pay attention, now comes the good news. Really? You could also kill it. How? Smike asked incredulously. Simply by obeying your feral instincts. What feral instincts? Have I got some? You carry the genes of one of this planet's most dangerous life forms, Smike. Huh? You're a deadly, dangerous fighting machine. You're the terror of the oceans. You're a shark, Smike. Never forget that, Smike. You're a shark, grub. Ushan DeLuca's finest hour. Ushan DeLuca knew exactly whom General TikTok would kill next. It would be Urs of the Snows. For anyone who knew as much about fighting and chess as Ushan, it wasn't hard to work that out. General TikTok was stronger and more agile than any other warrior in the arena. In chess terms, he was the queen. If he thought strategically, he would be bound to concentrate on those opponents who were doing his soldiers most damage. They were Rumo and Rolf, Urs and Vasco, Dalek and Bala, and of course himself, Ushan DeLuca. Wherever they wielded their swords, the theater guards died like flies, so TikTok's next move must be to eliminate one of them. Rumo? No, he was too far away. Rolf was considerably closer. Vasco was even closer than Rolf, Oleg closer than Vasco, and Bala closer than Oleg. But Urs of the Snows was the closest of all. Urs, fighting with his back to the mechanical monster, was busy with 5 opponents at once. No, now there were only 4. TikTok had only to take a few steps, and he could cut down one of the most dangerous Wolverines from behind. Ushan analyzed the situation as though studying a chessboard instead of a battlefield. What to do if one of the most valuable pieces was threatened? Sacrifice a pawn? That was the only possibility. And who should be the pawn that had to die in Ursa's place? He himself, of course, Ushan DeLuca. Ushan tossed his sword aside. This was a contest in which sword would be useless. He would never need a sword again. Resolutely he strode towards the general. How good he felt, how strong and light-footed. He had never felt better in his life. Urs performed a swift lunge that dispatched another opponent. Ushan had known that the youngster was good, but here in the arena he was surpassing himself. Urs of the Snows would someday be the finest swordsman in Wolverine, perhaps in all of Zamonia. Of that, Ushan was convinced. Hey, he called when he was standing close behind General TikTok. Hey, General TikTok, is that your name? The metal giant slowly turned to face him. Yes, Tick, it is, and who, Tok, are you? My name is Ushan DeLuca. Pleased to meet you, the general said with a little bow. Tell me, Ushan DeLuca, why, Tick, are you facing me unarmed? Have you, Tok, lost your wits or your nerve? Neither, Ushan said with a smile. I've nothing left to lose. Not even your life, asked the general. Is it worth, Tick, so little to you? Oh, I've never set much store by it, said Ushan. I found it wearisome most of the time, especially in bad weather. For all that, there's more life in me than you could ever dream of. What talk do you mean? TikTok demanded. I mean, you lost this battle. No matter what you do and no matter how many enemies you defeat and kill, you can never win it. It's impossible. Even if you're the only survivor of this battle, there's more in life in every corpse on the battlefield than will ever be in you. Such is your lot. You're the saddest creature I've ever encountered. I'm sorry for you. That's what I wanted to tell you. Have you, Tick, finished? Asked General TikTok. He leveled a steel foreigner at Ushan. Now I understand. You're trying to provoke me into killing you instead of one of your friends. Ushan didn't answer. He shut his eyes and lost himself in the scene that unfolded before his inner eye. Banners of red and yellow, gold, and copper fluttered in the breeze. It was like a colossal painting imbued with all the colors of battle, the sense of courage and fear, triumph and defeat. He had never seen anything so magnificent. I wonder what a swordsman's paradise looks like, he thought. Is it as beautiful as my fencing garden? Tick-Tock bit his thumb. There was a faint click, followed by a sharp report, and his forefinger detached itself and sped towards Ushan faster than any crossbow bolt. The Wolverting didn't even raise an arm to protect himself, and the steel finger buried itself deep in his chest. Ushan made no sound. He recoiled a step, but remained on his feet. Tick-Tock bent his thumb once more. Another click, and a series of detonations, and another 3 fingers buried themselves in Ushan's ribcage. 4 thin, faintly twanging steel wires were now suspended between the general's hand and the Wolverting's chest. Tick-Tock bent his thumb a third time, thereby activating a mechanism that reeled in the wires and recovered the arrows. His entrails emitted a whirring sound as Ushan was jerked off his feet and hoisted into the air. The fingers clicked back into the hand, and General Tick-Tock held him up by the chest. No one, Tick, has ever dared to tell me, Tock, the truth to my face before, the general whispered. You're a hero, Ushan Duluka. Gripping the Wolverting's head with his other hand, he tore the steel fingers free and held them in the air. They were cupped around Ushan's still beating heart. Steel versus bone. Rumo consoled himself during the battle between the Copper Killers and the dead Yetis with the thought that his role would be that of a chronicler rather than a warrior. Monsters and shocking though they were, he had to memorize all these images and preserve them for posterity. For it was doubtful if anything of the kind would ever be seen again. It was the grimmest and most ruthless battle that had ever raged between two opposing sides. Yetis fought on with their oil-sodden cloaks and bones ablaze. Copper Killers continued to flail away long after they lost their heads. Severed limbs fell to the ground while their owners fought on undaunted, and others snatched them up for use as weapons. A headless Copper Killer with a thick jet of steam issuing from its throat was locked in a mortal combat with a Yeti whose skull was in flames. 2 Yetis swung their heavy hammers at a Copper Killer bereft of both arms. Splinters of bone, cogwheels, screws, and teeth went whistling through the air. Valves hissed. Shields clanged like bells, and the Yeti's bestial roars rang out again and again. Scullop cursed and swung his scythe at the Copper Killers, who cowered away because even metal burst asunder under its impact. For a while it had really looked as if the Yetis would win the day thanks to their toughness and the advantage of surprise, but the longer the battle raged, the more illusory this hope became. Now and then some Copper Killer would be forced back against the balcony rail and hurled over the edge, or systematically dismembered by a ceaseless rain of blows from hammers and clubs. Nor were the Yetis much inferior to the metal warriors in fortitude. Like them, they felt no pain and had no fear of death, but a Copper Killer had to smash a Yeti to pieces to prevent him from rising to his feet again. In the long run, however, it seemed that the mechanical soldiers would prevail, if only because metal was more durable than bone. More and more Yetis fell to the ground and lay still because every single one of their bones had been smashed beyond repair. The Copper Killers used all their concealed weapons, their circular saws, razor-sharp pincers, and flamethrowers. Ribble briefly wondered whether to fight his way down the steps and into the arena, taking the Wolvertings with him, but the place was now swarming with so many enemy soldiers that it would have spelt certain death. So he was compelled to watch Scullop's warriors being driven further and further back, and losing more and more of their number. He had no choice but to commit as many details to memory as possible and hope that the tide would eventually turn in the Yeti's favor after all. Battle in the bloodstream. Everything a go, Smike? A go. Oh, that's just our way of asking if everything's all right. A go is an inconceivably small number that... All right, thought Smike. Yes, everything's a go. I'm only swimming through dead blood towards a deadly disease. Why shouldn't everything be a go? Lots of luck, Smike. Yes, lots of luck. You can do it, son. The non-existent teenies abruptly fell silent, leaving Smike to fend for himself again. Beneath him stretched an endless battlefield strewn with mutilated organisms. Above him floated some hideous soldier of death, the last representative of an implacable disease, intent on barring the way to Rala's heart. Discounting the clicks it emitted, it made no sound at all. Spike swam on until he was level with his opponent. Hideous and dangerous though the creature was, he found it fascinating to observe its ceaseless movements, mutations, and changes of color at close range, to Just now it had been a scuttulated star, shimmering with all the colors of the rainbow. Then it had mutated into a transparent gray ball full of billowing milky liquid. The next moment it looked like a fiery red lava bubble ejected by a crater on the ocean bed. The only constant factor was its monotonous clicking. "Who are you?" Smike thought. "Are you Death?" The lava bubble mutated into a green sponge with streaks of black fluid rising from its honeycombed surface. Click, click, it went. "No," thought Smike, "you aren't Death. Death is something that comes when you have gone. Death is a happy release compared to you. Death is good, you are evil." The sponge controlled. "Who are you, after all? I'm an amateur. What do you know about fighting?" Click, click, click. "How long have you been in existence?" asked Smike. "A few months, a few weeks." "Me, I have existed for millions of years. I'm a shark. That's why." The creature mutated yet again. It assumed an elongated shape, turned gray, sprouted 14 little arms tipped with claws, and opened a mouth studded with countless sharp teeth. It now resembled a more primitive and dangerous version of Smike himself. The general and the monster. Rumo, Rolf, Vasco, Bala, and Oleg converged on General TikTok from all directions and came to a halt, forming a big circle around him. They had made a quick work of their opponents after seeing what the general had done to Ushan DeLuca. The fencing master's lifeless body was lying at his feet. "Oh ho!" chuckled TikTok. "You've got me surrounded. I'm trapped. Was this a friend of yours?" Ushan's bones splintered as he rested his foot on the fencing master's corpse. "Who would like to be next?" he asked. "Are you General TikTok?" Rumo demanded. "Yes, I am." "Did you kill Rala?" General TikTok involuntarily clutched his chest. His shoulders sagged a little, but only for an instant. Then he straightened up again. "Who wants to know?" he asked angrily. Rumo didn't reply. He now knew that it was TikTok who had inflicted such havoc on his beloved. The general surveyed his adversaries. Rumo, Rolf, Vasco, Bala, and Olet began to circle him slowly. Meanwhile, more and more Wolpertines had stopped fighting and joined them in the arena. Nearly all the soldiers had been killed or put to flight. "Oh ho!" TikTok said again. "So you want to dance, do you?" He threw back his cloak. It was only now that the Wolpertines could see his physique in all its splendor. Copper, steel, silver, iron, every part of him was metal. His body was a huge mechanized fortress constructed of the most diverse materials, a whole army on a single body. "Before you all have to die," TikTok said gravely, "you should know something. My days in hell have changed me. I've grown I've loved, I've suffered. I've become another person. You may think me big, but I'm far bigger, than you suspect. Would you like to see my true dimensions?" Without waiting for an answer, he tilted his head to one side, inserted a forefinger in a hole in his neck, and turned it like a key. Instantly, his body emitted a series of sounds that resembled the discordant chimes of a broken musical clock. His head revolved several times to this accompaniment, and his neck grew steadily longer. His insides clicked and ticked as sections of armor plate folded back or slid apart to reveal his mechanical intestines. Cogwheels rotated, wires drew taut. Alchemical batteries crackled, pistons rose and fell, all was in ceaseless motions. His back plates unfolded into 2 silver wings, and from the resulting apertures, new metallic limbs extended telescopically until they touched the ground. To the Wolpertines' amazement, they saw that General TikTok had not only doubled in size, but acquired twice as many arms and legs within a few seconds. All the weapons that had hitherto been concealed inside his body, crossbows, blades, missiles, had been exposed and rendered combat-ready. They were now confronted by a 4-armed, 4-legged fortress bristling with weapons. The new General TikTok was even bigger and more dangerous, deadlier, and more unassailable than before. "Size!" cried TikTok, looking down at them. "That's the key to power. What you see here, Tick, is only the start. I shall continue to grow, Tok, for as long as there is any metal left. I shall grow, Tick, until all the metal in existence is General TikTok." The Wolpertine stood there as though turned to stone. The sight of the huge machine was hypnotic. "You wanted to dance," moved the general. "Let's dance then." The Wolpertines braced themselves for battle. No one knew where General TikTok would strike first, everywhere at once, all perhaps. Suddenly, the floor of the theater began to shake, slightly but perceptibly. What was that? Someone asked. TikTok, too, had stiffened. There, another trimmer made his weapons jangle. The Wolpertines looked mystified. What was causing those tremors? Fighting was still in progress in the Copper Killer's gallery, but they didn't seem to come from there. An earthquake? Asked Bala. But the tremors were too rhythmical for an earthquake. They followed one another at intervals of several seconds, becoming ever stronger, and suddenly a gust of wind swept through the theater, laden with a stench reminiscent of everything vile that had ever crawled out of the oceans. What is it? Asked Urs. A Vrahawk, Rumo exclaimed. A really big one. The tremors had intensified the tumult in the auditorium. The surviving spectators redoubled their desperate efforts to escape from the theater. Only the Yetis and the Copper Killers, who seemed unimpressed, fought on with undiminished ferocity. A pale blue glow filled the theater, and everything was enveloped in a shower of luminous blue slime. It looked as if a monstrous flying object was descending on the arena. A huge, glowing, pale blue disk with organic shapes pulsating inside it. Everyone could now see that it was a body whose 12 supporting legs had halted in a circle around the building. A Vrahawk of the largest variety had settled over the theater of death like a roof. The spectators screamed in terror. From inside the monster came piercing whistles and incessant churning noises. General TikTok stalked to and fro on his 4 legs, instantly demoted from a giant into an insect. What fool had alerted the Vrahawk? He had everything under control. What is it? Asked Rolf. It's a Vrahawk, said Yukabak, who had ventured out from behind Rumo. A Vrahawk? Is that a machine too? No, a living creature. Whose side is it on? Asked Bala. Not ours, Yukabak replied. Can it do anything apart from being big? It could eat us. It can eat anything. How? Asked Urs. I can't see a mouth. It's got one, believe me, said Yukabak. Tentacles as thick as a man and as long as the trees came snaking over the theater's walls and swept along the tiers of seats. Any spectators unlucky enough to be grazed by them, let alone struck full on, were hurled aside, crushed, or sent whirling through the air. Being endowed with greater athletic skill, the few Wolpertines still up there managed to dodge them. The blind monster, which was trying to get its bearings, made no distinction between friend and foe. Are you sure it isn't on our side, after all? Asked Bala. It's been working for us up to now. It isn't easy to control, Yukabak explained. There are riders on its back who try to do so. They're probably having trouble at the moment. This is the biggest specimen that's ever been ridden into the city. The Vrahawk now extended its gigantic trunk. It slithered over rows of empty seats in search of prey, and all its vicinity fled, screaming and trampling each other underfoot. The tip of the trunk squelched open and greedily sniffed the air. The Vrahawk's sense of smell quickly guided it to one of the exits where jostling, panic-stricken spectators were striving to escape. The trunk descended on them and indiscriminately proceeded to suck up everyone it encountered. Screaming, the luckless individuals shot up the transparent tube and were engulfed by the monster's pulsating intestines. Rumo was less surprised than most by the sight of the Vrahawk, knowing these creatures and their capabilities. He was primarily interested in General TikTok, who was watching the monster's activities with as much fascination as everyone else. He gripped his sword, feverishly wondering how best to exploit this moment of universal consternation. Have you had an idea? Asked Adeline. I remembered an old story, Rumo replied. What old story? Asked Krindle. The story of the Battle of Nern Forest. It tells how General TikTok came into being. You mean you know how he originated? Asked Adeline. It's a legend. What's interesting is the part where the alchemist who created General TikTok inserted a nugget of Zemonium into him, an element that would bring him and the Copper Killers to life. If the story is correct, he must possess something in the nature of a brain, or a heart. And if he's got a heart or a brain, said Krindle, it could be ripped out of his body. Rumo nodded. I'm going to climb inside General TikTok, he said. The connectors. Smike, breathing heavily, was back inside the subcutaneous submarine, with sweat streaming down his plump body. Everything will go, Smike? Yes, Smike, everything will go? Come on, say something. Smike couldn't have produced a coherent answer, even if he'd wanted to. That was incredible, Smike, said the non-existent teeny number 1. How did you manage it? Asked non-existent teeny number 2. Yes, Smike, how did you manage it? Smike drew up several deep breaths. He wasn't finding it easy to switch back to lung breathing. His gills were still pumping away like mad. It had a spine, he said. A spine, said non-existent teeny number 1. A spine, said non-existent teeny number 2. A disease with a spine, said non-existent teeny number 3. Yes, snapped Smike. The disease had a spine capable of being broken. The non-existent teenies fell silent. Good, Smike said at length. Can we get on with the confounded operation at last? Yes, Smike. If you're ready, we're ready too. The boat's in position. How do we proceed? Asked Smike. Can you see the connectors, Smike? We've set the video membrane at maximum magnification. Yes, I can see them, said Smike. There were 6 peculiar bulges and indentations in the cardiac muscle fiber, but everything inside here consisted of peculiar bulges and indentations. He couldn't have said what was special about these particular ones. That one is an Malarkin adapter, said non-existent teeny number 1. It takes care of the heart's electrical circulation. And that's the hallucinogenic synapse, said non-existent teeny number 2. It's a gangliate cord of the autonomous nervous system that conveys the sympathetic vibrations of the hallucinogenic key. That's an apobiniactic adapter, said the non-existent teeny number 3. It alone can enable stimuli of apobiniactic pincers to operate freely. That's a Nabokovian knob, said the non-existent teeny number 1. It reacts activo-passively on the stimuli imparted by the Nabokovian whip, thereby regulating the heartbeat. That's an epithalamian egress, said non-existent teeny number 2. It's the epicentric microcenter of the aorta that coronarily equalizes the sympathetic vibrations. And that's an odontoid tube, said non-existent teeny number 3. The precise function of the odontoid tube has never been satisfactorily explained, but it's demonstrably of a positive nature. Is that clear, Smike? As daylight, said Smike. I'm in the picture now. In that case, activate your instruments, commanded non-existent teeny number 1. Home, went Spike. Home, trapped inside Tick-Tock. Rumo simply jumped. He hadn't spent long debating where to land, because no part of General Tick-Tock's body seemed a particularly suitable landing place. He was now clinging to the General's back at the point where the 2 silver wings had folded outwards. From here, he had a good view of the interior. It concealed still more weapons, still more clicking and ticking metal components, but he couldn't discern anything in the way of a heart or a brain. General Tick-Tock groped for Rumo with his steel claws, trying to brush him off like a troublesome insect, but his arms, although long, were constructed in such a way that certain parts of his anatomy were hard or impossible for them to reach. Everything about him was geared to attack, not defense, and nobody, least of all General Tick-Tock himself, had ever dreamt that anyone would be insane enough to cling to his back. The other Wolpertines bravely hurled spears, knives, and axes at the general, but there was little more they could do, being far too preoccupied with dodging his own weapons and missiles. Although Oleg scored some magnificent hits on the copper killer's head with his sling, all they produced were some dull clangs. "Climb inside him," called Dandelion. "You'll have to if you want to find his heart. Besides, you'll be safe from him in there." Rumo squeezed between 2 close-set steel rods and into the metal warrior's interior. The ticking and clicking, the whirring of cogwheels, the rhythmical pounding of pistons, and the cackle of alchemical batteries attained such a pitch that they almost drowned every sound outside. Everything jerked and clicked at regular intervals. It was rather like being inside a watch. Was there really a heart hidden in here? Did such a sophisticated machine require an organic motor? Rumo pressed on. Everything around him was in motion, pumping up and down and back and forth. He had to take great care not to get his hands and feet crushed between two revolving cogwheels or trapped by some sharp-edged spring. Every component was smooth, burnished, and smeared with lubricating oil. It was almost impossible to find a firm handhold or foothold. "Enjoying yourself, Tick, in there?" boomed General Tick-Tock, his voice sounding even hollower and more mechanical than before. "Are you enjoying yourself, inside me, Wolperting?" Rumo didn't answer. "Make yourself at home," cried the general. "Be my guest. I'll shut the doors so we won't be disturbed." A grating noise came from somewhere, and the wheels and pistons speeded up. Rumo once more heard the music that had accompanied the general's expansion to twice its original size, except that this time it sounded still more discordant because it was playing backwards. The sheets of armor plate encasing General Tick-Tock's body slid together. Flaps and openings snapped shut, metal locked into metal. The crankshafts and pistons, which Rumo was balancing on or clinging to, rose and fell unceasingly. It was growing darker inside the general. "He's shutting himself up," cried Dandelion. "We must get out of here, quick." Weapons were being retracted on all sides, razor-sharp blades, saws and scythes, axes and spears, arrows and knives. Some shot in at high speed. Others were withdrawn quite slowly. They come from left and right, above and below, ahead and behind. An axe whizzed just over Rumo's head. A scythe shaved clumps of fur off his arm. A long double-edged sword blade darted between his legs. He had to keep ducking or dodging, or pulling his legs in to avoid being beheaded, skewered, or mutilated. At the same time, he tried desperately to reach the aperture he'd entered by. Just as he was about to squeeze between the steel rods, however, the two silver wings that formed General Tick-Tock's backplate closed. It was silent now and completely dark except for the criss-cross shafts of light that filtered in through narrow chinks. A muffled bell note rang out like that of a clock chiming the hour. "We're trapped," said Dandelion. "We're trapped inside General Tick-Tock." The operation. Actually, I have to go very quickly. I'll be right back. I got Ritz. I don't know why, I got so hungry. I don't think we have very much left of the book. Okay, so we're 10 pages from the last chapter. I'm so hungry. The operation. The amylorecan hook has engaged with the amylorecan adapter, said the non-existent teeny number 1. This means that the heart's aortic electrical circulation is guaranteed. Vroom, went Smike. The hallucinogenic key has been inserted into the hallucinogenic lock and turn, said non-existent teeny number 2. The sympathetic vibrations have now been decoded and can flow into the autonomous nervous system. Went Smike. The opobiniatic adapter has been clamped into the opobiniatic membrane, said the non-existent teeny number 3. Opobiniatization can commence. Vroom, went Smike. The Naboquavian. Usually I can say that, easily. I don't know why sometimes, mentally, it's like. The Naboquavian whip is stimulating the Naboquavian knob, said non-existent teeny number one. If I'm not thinking about it, it's Nabokov, that's not right. It's Nabokov, not Nabokov. Sorry. Nabokov. Anyway, so non-existent teeny number one, the consequent passio-active reaction has fully adjusted the heartbeat. Went Smike. The epithelium screw is rotating in the epithelium egress, said non-existent teeny number two. The sympathetic vibrations are being coronarily equalized. Went Smike. The odontoid tube has been inserted in the odontoid socket, said the non-existent teeny number three. Whatever it does, it'll be for the best. Went Smike. Good, now to feed the auritic charge. Let's cross our fingers, Smike. Wish us luck. I will. How many fingers have you got, Smike? Smike did some mental arithmetic. 56, he said. That ought to do the trick. Yes, said Smike. It ought to, unless there's still a curse on me. You never can tell, said the non-existent teeny number one. The operation is now in progress. The greatest show ever. Friftar shut the spy hole through which he had been watching the arena and clapped a hand over his mouth. General TikTok's theatrical performance had left him utterly dismayed. Already bristling with weapons, the copper killer had contrived to make his body even bigger, more complex and dangerous. He had transformed himself into an invincible fighting machine. How could Friftar's most diplomatic resources, hope to compete with him? His other source of dismay was the Brahawk. What a fiasco! Why had those idiotic alchemists sent him one of the biggest and most unpredictable specimens? A 50-footer would have been quite enough. No Vrahawk of such a size had ever set foot in the city before, and it was out of control. If word got out that he had issued the Vrahawk alert, the Hellies would hold him responsible for the losses in their own ranks, and the stupid monster simply wouldn't stop sucking respected citizens to its maw. Aristocrats, wealthy merchants, army officers, and all. It was more than the eye could bear to watch. Friftar swore. He was doomed to sit still and wait for General TikToks and the Vrahawk to finish wreaking havoc in the theater of death. At least the crazy king was asleep. That was one mercy. He opened the spy hole again. It was too stunning a spectacle to miss. The arena drenched with luminous blue rain, the gigantic mechanical warrior in combat with the Wolverines, the even more gigantic Brahawk devouring innocent Hellion citizens from above, the corpses, the screams of the dying, the showers of sparks from the Copper Killer's gallery. What a sight! To be honest, thought Friftar, it was far and away the best show the Theater of Death had ever presented. TikTok combines pleasure with business. General TikTok was entitled to feel satisfied. His victim was trapped. Wolverines fight the excellent fighters, but strategy didn't appear to be their greatest strength. The general's body contained 47 large swords, 14 glass daggers filled with poison, 24 circular saws with diamond-tipped teeth, 7 axes, 18 spears, and hundreds of arrows, crossbow bolts, and other missiles, half of them poisoned. His arsenal also included a built-in guillotine on rails, acid-filled syringes, flamethrowers, spiked metal throwing discs, arbalests, and many other weapons. The Wolverine was already dead. All that remained was to decide on the manner of his death. He had climbed into his coffin of his own accord. General TikTok decided to combine pleasure with business. He would do battle with the other Wolverines, try out a few of his new toys, and simultaneously give the intruder hell. Send blades whizzing back and forth for him to jump over. For the first time ever, TikTok was in the delightful position of being able to torture someone and at the same time do some fighting and killing. He could feel his sorrow subsiding. The heart in the dark. Runo had found a girder forming part of General TikTok's basic framework to which he could temporarily cling. The light filtering through the clinks and the gaps between the General's distorted ribs was so poor that all he could see of the crankshafts, rotating cogwheels, and retracted weapons was a jumble of dark silhouettes. There's nothing here that looks like a heart or a brain, Rumo decided. If he ever had one, perhaps he lost it. You will seek the heart of death on legs, but you will find it only in darkness, said Dandelion. What? The last of the Ugly's prophecies, don't you remember? What are you getting at? Crindle demanded. What have those old hags to do with this? It means I must shut my eyes, said Rumo. I must try to locate General TikTok's heart with my nose. Good idea, said Crindle. Carry on. Rumo clung tightly to the girder and shut his eyes. What can you see? Asked Dandelion. I can see metals of various colors, Rumo replied. Metals and lubricating oil. It's everywhere. I can see other things, but only when they're moving and making noises. What about a heart? Asked Crindle. Can you smell his heart? I don't know. There are some strange, unfamiliar smells. Acids, poisons, pungent powders, but nothing could be hard. But nothing that could be a heart. Or a brain. If they're inside here, they're well hidden. Perhaps we should go further in. Dandelion suggested. If they're hidden, he's bound to have buried them as deep as possible. Rumo opened his eyes and climbed further into TikTok's mechanized innards. Climbing proved riskier again because the motion was even more hectic and universal than before. The general lurched to and fro, lunged and retreated, turned on the spot. Rumo could hear sword blades clashing and missiles bouncing off of him. Finding a couple of fixed metal rods that weren't in motion, he clung to them, shut his eyes, and sniffed the air again. What can you smell? Asked Dandelion. Rumo's nose again detected the strong-smelling powder, the reek of flammable oil in the flamethrower's takes, and the smoky tang of a used flint, and the acrid smells given off by sun-dried poisons and chemical cleaning agents, all of them visible as colored ribbons that knotted themselves tightly together to form a graphic picture of the general's inner life. And in its midst, in the center of the mechanical warrior, Rumo sighted a rhythmically pulsating green glow. I can see a light, Rumo whispered. Where? Asked Dandelion. Rumo continued to climb, this time with his eyes shut. Be careful what you hold on to, Crindle warned. There are lots of blades here. They may be poisoned. Rumo squeezed through some bars, ducked under a rotating wheel with sharp teeth, stepped over a glass blade filled with crimson poison, and found himself immediately above the source of the pulsating glow. He was near enough to open his eyes and ascertain its nature. It was hard to make out in the gloom. Encased in lead, it was a small brick-shaped box, from which numerous cables led to various parts of the machine. The box was humming and crackling. Rumo rested his paw on it. It was as cold as ice. It's an alchemical battery, he said disappointedly. A battery doesn't pulsate, said Dandelion. It's in there. His heart is inside the battery, surrounded by acid. It must be immensely powerful if you can sense it through the lead. A good hiding place. Smash it, Kindle urged. Smash the battery and rip the heart out of his body before he grasps what we're up to in here. Rumo raised his sword and split the battery's lead casing at the stroke. With a hiss, glowing green acid escaped from the crack, sending up a cloud of acrid vapor. As the acrid drained off into the darkness below, the white object enclosed in it became visible. Pa, said Crindle, just a stupid stone. The Zemonium, Dandelion whispered. Take it. Rumo sheathed his sword, reached for the Zemonium, and recoiled. What's wrong? Asked Crindle. At the touch of the Zemonium, Rumo's limbs had been transfixed by a shaft of ice-cold lightning, and his head filled with the babble of countless voices. What is it? It feels extremely unpleasant, said Rumo. Can't you touch it? Asked Dandelion. Yes, but not for very long, I'm afraid. General TikTok faltered. For one brief moment, he'd experienced the loss of self-control, a terrible and totally unfamiliar sensation. It was as if something inside him had snapped. A wire, a steel cable, a conduit, something that had thrown him off balance. He teetered to and fro on his four legs until he regained his equilibrium. He woke from the frenzy that had overcome him, the savage delight he had taken in battling with the Wolpertines who were launching one attack after another. This temporary loss of control reminded him that he must deal with the creature inside his body before it could become a serious threat. Much to his regret, he would have to stop toying with the Wolvertines and proceed to execute the prisoner inside him. He sighed. Torture and combat simply didn't mix. The Simonium. Something came whistling towards Rumo's head. He quickly ducked as the air above him was cleft by an axe blade on a pendulum. It soared off into the darkness, paused briefly, and swung back. The axe sped past him twice more, then came to rest. "Go on, take the stupid stone," cried Crindle. "Take it and let's get out of here." Rumo took hold of the Simonium and removed it from the lead casing. Never had he touched anything colder, and he resisted the impulse to let go of it at once. Now he had only one forepaw available to climb with. High above him, Tick-Tock's back plate suddenly opened, and shafts of light streamed in. The general couldn't have chosen a better moment. Rumo stepped over the red glass dagger, squeezed through some scaffolding, and started to climb. Ominous noises could be heard on all sides. Rotating circular saw blades swept to and fro. Sabers probed the gloom. All of General Tick-Tock's metal components were searching for the captive inside them. Rumo continued to climb with the Simonium firmly clutched in his fist. He had never carried a more onerous burden. He could feel the cold taking possession of his paw, his arm, his shoulder, his head. His ears suddenly rang with hundreds of voices. "Grow!" they screamed in unison. "You must grow! You can't be the greatest Wolperting of all! So you can be the greatest Wolperting of all, you and I must become a single being." The voices confused him. He inadvertently gripped a sharp blade, cutting his other paw badly, and quickly let go of it. He swayed and almost fell. "Grow!" the voices cried. "You must grow! You can become the greatest of all!" Rumo took hold of a girder with his bleeding paw and hauled himself together. "Together we can be all-powerful," screeched the Simonium. "You're strong, but I can make you even stronger." A series of clicks rang out in the darkness, crossbows being cocked. "Look out!" Crindle yelled. "Crossbow bolts!" Rumo heard a twanging of strings. He ducked as a score of bolts whizzed over his head. They crashed into a metal plate, ricocheted off it, and went whistling through the air. He continued to climb. "You're a mighty warrior," the Simonium whispered. "You have no idea what we could achieve together. I can make you immortal." "Don't listen to that, twaddle," said Dandelion. "It's utter rubbish. Nothing can ever part us," the Simonium hissed. "Together we can be eternal." "Look out!" Crindle shouted again. But it was too late. Quick as a flash, a sword darted out of the gloom and inflicted a deep wound in the arm of Rumo was using to carry the Simonium. The blade was mechanically withdrawn and clicked back into place. To Rumo's surprise, he felt no pain. His arm was completely numb. "That blade was poisoned," said the Simonium, "but it can't harm you. My presence has rendered you invulnerable." Rumo saw the poison in the wound evaporate with a hiss, and the wound itself heal within seconds. "We could be all-powerful." "Look out!" cried Dandelion. "Duck!" Rumo did so, and a guillotine blade mounted on rails flashed past overhead. "Stop listening to that nonsense and concentrate on getting out of here," said Dandelion. By now the big opening Rumo had climbed in through was not far above him. Peering through the chinks in Tick-Tock's armor, he saw that Wolpertings had leapt at the general from all directions. Among them were Rolf, Olek, Bala, who held out their arms to him. "Here, Rumo! Here, here! You can make it, Rumo!" Some of the Wolpertings were swept aside by Tick-Tock's huge hands, but their place was instantly taken by others. They were all risking their lives for him. "Come on, Rumo! Come on!" Urs limped through the opening and held out his paw. "Catch hold, Rumo, quick!" Rumo's body had gone cold and numb. Only the arm and paw with which he was clinging to the rim of the opening seemed to be obeying him. If he let go and missed, he would fall into the midst of General Tick-Tock's rotating circular saws and slashing blades. Everything swam before his eyes. "He's shutting the doors again," Urs yelled. "His back plate's closing." Looking up, Rumo vaguely saw that the doors in the general's back were slowly converging. He let go. Urs grabbed his wrist and held it in a vice-like grip. "Got you," he shouted. Then, gritting his teeth and grunting with exertion, he proceeded to haul away. Rumo just hung there like a sack of potatoes and made no attempt to help. Cursing, Urs hoisted him through the opening, seized him under the arms from behind and jumped. They landed on their backs in the sand. Rumo lay there, groaning and glassy-eyed, with the Simonium clutched in his fist. Urs scrambled to his feet and helped him up. The other Wolpertings had suspended their attacks on Tick-Tock. The general continued to stomp around, visibly bemused and disoriented. He extended and retracted his weapons in a mechanical way. His lower jaw had dropped, but all that issued from his mouth was a monotonous clicking sound. Oleg walked up to Rumo. "What's that in your paw?" he asked. "It's Tik-Tok's heart," Rumo mumbled vaguely. "Where is he?" "His heart," said Oleg. He held out his sling. "I've had an idea. Put it in there." "No!" Zirmonium screamed in Rumo's head. "No, we must stay together." Rumo retreated a step. "Go on," said Oleg, proffering the sling once more. "I'll get rid of it for you." "Get rid of the darn thing," Dandelion said sharply. "Let it go." "That's an order," Criddle barked. Rumo gave a start and dropped the stone into the sling. Oleg stepped forward. He whirled the sling several times around his head, then released one of the gongs and sent the Zirmonium on its way. Everyone followed its trajectory, spellbound. The white stones soared over the arena and the auditorium in a wide arc, heading straight for the Rawhawk's trunk, which was indiscriminately sucking up dust, rubbish, spectators, soldiers, alive or dead. The Zirmonium shot up the transparent tube, was lost from view amid the contents of the monster's stomach. Some of the Wolpertines had already turned away and redirected their attention to General Tik-Tok, who was reeling around. When the Rawhawk's trunk stopped sucking, all eyes turned to the monster once more. Choking sounds issued from its body. It resumed sucking only to stop a second time, and a third. Quivering and twitching as if racked with convulsions, the trunk reared high above the auditorium where all it could inhale was thin air. In the end it stopped sucking altogether. A brief silence that followed was broken by hair-raising howls and whistles. The gigantic creature swayed back and forth above the theater, the contents of its blue body frothing and bubbling. A muffled explosion in the Rawhawk's stomach became hugely distended. A second explosion in the skin of its stomach tautened more ominously still. The surviving spectators started to yell and jostle again. The Rawhawk gave another terrible heave, and its trunk regurgitated a gooey mass of slime, detritus, and half-digested corpses that distributed itself over the rows of the seats. A third explosion. The Rawhawk's body split open in several places, spilling out thick strands of blue intestine. The monster emitted another ear-splitting howl. Then one of its huge legs buckled. Its joints groaned like trees about to fall. Another leg gave way, and another. In attempting to keep its balance with the remainder, the Rawhawk lurched against the wall of the theater so violently that a long vertical crack appeared in the masonry. The huge creature's collapse was now inevitable. Whistling shrilly, it slowly keeled over on its side. Its gargantuan body took large sections of the theater's octagonal walls with it, burying the auditorium under a mass of rubble and soot-blackened skulls. The Rawhawk's armor-plated back crashed to the ground outside the theater, together with its drivers, but those inside could clearly hear it crack open and send a gurgling tide of entrails flowing through the streets of hell. Clouds of black dust billowed into the air and drew a merciful veil over this horrific scene. Then they subsided, covering everything in soot and ashes. Classical music. A sound went echoing through the dead world of Rala's bloodstream. Ba-bum! It sounded like a kettle drum, like the timekeeper's drum on a boat rowed by galley slaves. Ba-bum! It was a sound that had beaten time in Rala's body, governing the rhythm of life ever since her birth. The sound that varied with repose and agitation, sleep and wakefulness. The sound that had been silenced by the advent of the subcutaneous suicide squad. "The heart, it's beating again," said non-existent Teeny number 1. "Ba-bum, it's beating well," said non-existent Teeny number 2. "Ba-bum, considering it was dead just now. It's beating excellently," remarked non-existent Teeny number 3. "Ba-bum." The submarine was toiling through the plasma. Although still thick and sluggish, the blood became a little more liquid every heartbeat that it sent it pulsing through Rala's veins. "The curdling process has stopped," said non-existent Teeny number 1. "The bloodstream is in motion," said non-existent Teeny number 2. "The propellers are turning more freely again," reported non-existent Teeny number 3. But Smite saw that the corpuscles too were starting to move. The mounds of corpses were vibrating in time to the pounding heart. Corpses! They were corpses no longer, but microscopic sluggards awakened by the incredible din and slowly coming to life. Ba-bum! 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 The heart beat on relentlessly. Smite couldn't help grinning. How could anyone have slept through that? It was a din fit to wake the dead. Sleepily, the corpuscles went whirling through the blood, stirring it up, warming and liquefying it. The heart delivered more and more powerful thrusts through the veins. The red corpuscles fluttered like swarms of butterflies, the white sailed among them like grains of pollen. In the end, they all broke into a whirling dance to the beat of the heart, percolating every vein in a dense stream. Smike was witnessing a rebirth, a triumph over death in which he himself had played a leading part. He quickly brushed away the tears that were trickling from his eyes. Then, despite himself, he laughed hysterically. "Ba-bum! That's the music of life," said the non-existent teeny number 1. "Ba-bum!" "It's rather monotonous," said the non-existent teeny number 2, "but a classic," said non-existent teeny number 3. "Ba-bum!" The submarine was gathering speed. "The music of life," cried Smike. "It's incredible. I had no idea that a heart could beat so beautifully." "We've got the better of death, Smike," said non-existent teeny number 1. "A nice sensation, isn't it, getting the better of something?" said non-existent teeny number 2. "How are you feeling, Smike?" asked non-existent teeny number 3. "Is everything a go?" "Yes," Smike replied with a laugh. "Everything's a go." General Tick-Tock's last weapon. Falling soot transformed the Wolpertines into black statues as they Tick-Tock's last stood watching the moribund Vrahok's final convulsions. Ash-covered spectators and soldiers were crawling and stumbling out of the theater over the breach in the wall. General Tick-Tock was still on his feet, but completely motionless. The Wolpertines reassembled around him at respectful distance. Also, that's the, okay. "Perhaps he's recuperating," said someone. "Perhaps he's dead," said Urs. "He isn't dead," said Bala. "Not him." Oleg picked up a stone, placed it in his sling, and fired it at the general's head. A dull clang reverberated around the ruined theater. "He's dead," Urs repeated. "Rumo has finished him. He's torn his heart out." "Either that or he's waiting for us to come closer," said Oleg. "We'll see," said Urs, walking up to the General Tick-Tock. Rumo, who still had to recover completely, limped after him. "Be careful," someone called. They halted at the feet of the biggest copper pillar and peered inside him suspiciously. All movement had ceased. Every cogwheel and weapon was stationary. Urs kicked one of the general's legs. They looked at Rumo. "He's had it," he said. "Had it for good." Rumo strained his ears. Although the feeling was gradually returning to his limbs, his senses weren't yet functioning normally. The left-hand side of his body felt numb, and he could hear a thin, piping whistle, but there was something else as well. A regular rhythmical sound. It was coming from inside the general's motionless body. Tick-tock, tick-tock. "Didn't you hear that?" Rumo asked. "Yes, he's still ticking a bit." Tick-tock, tick-tock. "How could he still be ticking if he's dead?" "Well," said Urs, "it must be some piece of machinery, maybe a spring running down. Relax, he's had it." Rumo shut his eyes and sniffed the air. He could still detect the smells he'd smelt in Tick-Tock's innards. The lubricating oil, the acid. Tick-tock, tick-tock, the strong-smelling powder. Tick-tock, tick-tock, flammable oil in the flamethrower's tanks. Tick-tock, tick-tock, the smoky flint. Rumo grabbed Urz's arm and ran for it. "Take cover, everyone," he yelled. "He's going to explode." The Wolpertines turned and ran. "It's his last weapon," Rumo shouted. The Wolpertines leapt over the mounds of rubble that had cascaded into the arena and took cover behind him. Tick-tock, tick-tock. There was a crackling sound from inside General Tick-Tock, followed by a dull report, and tongues of flame darted from every aperture. Then, with a far louder explosion, his armor-plated exterior shattered into 1,000 pieces. Daggers, swords, and axes, saw blades, arrows, screws, nuts, bolts, silver, iron, steel, and copper flew in all directions, whistled over the Wolpertines' heads, and lodged in the auditorium's walls and seats. Tick-Tock's head soared high into the air, almost as high as the Vrahok had towered above the theater. On reaching its apogee, it turned over several times like a sword in a multiple de Luca. It hung there for a moment, then plunged back into the arena and buried itself deep in the sand. A thin rain of biting acid came hissing down. The last few metal components that hit the ground with a clatter, and a layer of glittering dust settled over everything. Utter silence followed. Even the din of battle in the Copper's Killer's gallery died away. The Wolpertines emerged from their refuge and toured the arena, marveling at what they saw. Everything sparkled and scintillated in shades of silver and copper. Every piece of rubble, every stone, every blackish skull that had lined the walls was peppered with tiny fragments of General Tick-Tock. The ruins of the Theater of Death had become a colossal mausoleum. The albino rat. Rumo and his friends were just preparing to withdraw when some strangely assorted newcomers entered the arena through one of the gates. It was the older Wolpertines led by Ribble and accompanied by Mayor Jowly of Bloomberg, Skulk, Scyther, and several huge figures swathed in black cloaks. "What about the Copper Killers?" someone called. "They simply stopped fighting," Ribble replied. "From one moment to the next, there was that explosion down here, and then—" He shrugged his shoulders. "They're still up there in the gallery, silent and motionless like clockwork toys that have run down." Rumo remembered Smite's account of the Battle of Nern Forest. "The end of General Tick-Tock has spelt the end of the Copper Killers as well," he said. "They were born with him, and they've died with him." Once the wounded had been patched up, Mayor Jowly gave the signal to withdraw. Like all those who had survived the fray, the Wolpertines, the Yetis, Yucaback, and Ribble made their way out over the mounds of debris that had once been walls. The theater of death had seemed completely devoid of life, but not for long. Only a few moments after everyone had left, a huge eyeless albino rat with a red tail and red claws entered the arena through one of the gates. It spent some time groping for live prey with its antennae. Eventually, when its quest proved fruitless, it tucked into the dead. The Red Prophecy. Oh, well, actually, I should probably look at that. It looks like there are only 27 pages left of the whole book. Yeah, you're right. What that expletion? Gornaby complained drowsily. "How am I expected to silp? First my deb shakes, neth the walls vibrate, and now 'tis series of explosions. What's gone?" Frithtar had roused Gornab from a deep, drugged sleep. The little king had drained a medicine bottle whose contents should have knocked him out for 3 days. "They're retreating," Frithtar cried dramatically. "The Wolpertines are retreating. They've put them to flight." "They're to-reating?" said Gornab, whose blurred speech was even harder to understand than usual. "The Tinkerwolves are to-reading? City Revolt?" "Yes, it's over," said Frithtar. He lowered his voice. "That was the good news. The bad news is—" "You mean there's Dabs when?" Gornab cut in, looking terrified. He pulled the covers over his head. "Well, there are a few items of news that aren't quite so good. The theater of death has been completely destroyed. General Tick-Tock is no longer with us, and the Copper Killers have ceased to exist. Heavy casualties have been sustained, civilian as well as military. A Vraha collapsed on top of a residential district." Frithtar cleared his throat. Gornab rubbed his eyes. "Oh," he said with a yawn, "is Tathal?" Frithtar collected his thoughts. Now came the really tricky part. He looked grim. "Well, Your Majesty, I'm afraid it isn't quite over. After all, the Wolpertines have destroyed our theater and killed General Tick-Tock and countless soldiers and civilians, not to mention a Vraha. We can't let them go unpunished." "No? Why tongue?" Gornab disappointedly shook the empty medicine bottle. "Because it would look bad in the history books. We must pursue the Wolpertines with the Brahawks and destroy them once and for all." Frithtar was shaken by a sudden fit of coughing. What's wrong, are you Lil?" Gornab raised his hand to ward off the germs. Frithtar shook himself. "I don't know. I fear I'm running a slight temperature." "A rutritin? But you've never been Lil Febor." "I know, it's nothing serious. A minor infection, probably." "An infection?" Gornab gasped. "Peek your infection away from me." Frithtar turned his back on the king with a handkerchief over his mouth and went on coughing. "I'm afraid you'll have to assume command of the Brahawks yourself. We must avoid the risk of infection at all costs." "You pecketst me to bocand the Hawkbrass?" Gornab hardly dared utter the words. "Yes, definitely. You must command the Vrahawks. It's essential for your majesty to show the population and the army how powerful you are, or we'll invite a revolution. This may be the only start." "Must I leery?" Gornab was hugging his pillow for protection. "In any case, your majesty, Hell will have little in the way of entertainment to offer you for the next few weeks. The theater and parts of the city are in ruins. There will be a lot of unpleasant political commitments, supervising, clearing up operations, delivering speeches, setting your subject's mind at rest. I could handle all those jobs for you in the meantime. You must also burn the corpses quickly to prevent an epidemic breaking out. Riptar coughed even harder. An epidemic, wailed Gornab, hugging his pillow even tighter. I don't want any epidemic. He strove to concentrate. Suddenly, an excursion to with the Brahawks didn't sound quite so unthinkable. Away from all this chaos. Away from riots, corpses, infections, and epidemics. It'll be a picnic, said Riptar. A triumphal procession. I'll have you conducted to the Brahawks right away. I'll take a day or two to mobilize and hypnotize them all. But you won't lack for luxury in the meantime. I shall give a big royal tent erected and send your staff to join you. Personal chef, court jesters, storytellers, dancing girls, all that your heart could desire. What's more, I shall give orders that you aren't to be troubled with any problems. Gornab gave a start. Them probs? What's wrong of limb probs? There won't be any, your majesty, I assure you. I shall instruct the Brahawk drivers to erect a canopied throne on the back of the biggest Brahawk. Once the Wolpertines have been overtaken, you'll assume the command, thereby ensuring that your name goes down in the annals as the king who quelled the Wolpertines' insurrection. Having given the orders for their destruction, you will sit on your throne and watch the spectacle from a safe altitude. After that, you'll return to hell in triumph. Gornab laughed. It all sounded very exciting, more fun than burning dead bodies. It occurs to me, Friptar said in a low voice. Waff? Gornab demanded. What occurs to you? Now I come to think of it, you'll be fulfilling the Red Prophecy. I will? But of course, Friptar smote his brow. It's your destiny. My destiny? Yes, indeed, Friptar cried excitedly. How could I have been so slow on the uptake? It's the fulfillment of the Red Prophecy. You're the Gornab of all Gornabs. This is the beginning of a new era. Gornab looked puzzled. But the next Norgab will be the Norgab of the Norgabs, he argued. Not at all, your majesty. You're the first Gornab, not the last. The alchemist must have made a mistake in their arithmetic. A translation error. By annihilating the Wolpertines, you'll be conducting the first official war against Overworld and fulfilling the prophecy. Then you'll be Gornab the First, the Gornab of all Gornabs. Yes, cried Gornab, I'll be Nograb the First, the Nograb of all Nograbs. And he punched his pillow in excitement. Riptar breathed a sigh of relief. He'd kindled the king's enthusiasm at last. The Nograb, growled Gornab. The Nograb of all Nograbs. Yes, yes, take me to the Hawkras. I want to clill the Tinkerwhoops. Clill, clill. The music of life. The Yetis and the Wolpertines had threaded their way in silence through the chaos surrounding the theater of death, bound for General Tick-Tock's tower. Chunks of the dead Vrahawk and lengths of its evil-smelling intestines lay everywhere. Hellings and homunculi were running around in confusion, too busy attending to their wounded to pay attention to the outsiders. Rolv and Rumo were confronted by an unenviable prospect on reaching the General's dark tower. They intended to recover Rala's corpse and take it back with them. While the others were discussing the best route home, they silently entered the tower. She's upstairs, said Rumo. They climbed the stairs to the Metal Maiden's chamber. Rumo opened the door and stood aside to let Rolf pass. Rala was standing in the middle of the room, pale as ghost, with sunken features and dark smudges under her eyes, trembling all over and unsteady on her legs. She was being supported by Smike and Professor Calibri, who was just taking her pulse. Ba-bum, 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 he said. The music of life. It's always nice to hear a classic. Rolf hurled himself at his sister and threw his arms around her. Rumo stood rooted to the spot. He found the sight of Rala as disconcerting as ever. Surprised, eh, my boy? Smite said with a grin. The miracle of life, a miracle, I might add, with the modesty so characteristic of me, in which I myself played a part. How did it go at the theater? Everything go? Rumo was still standing there as though thunderstruck. Go, he said bemusedly. Oh, said Smike, it's just a figure of speech. I was asking if all went well. The theater is in ruins, Rumo said dully. My friends are free. General Tick-Tock is dead. Who's General Tick-Tock? Asked Rala. For a moment they all fell silent. Rumo and Rala stared at each other like two sleepers awakening from a nightmare. Rumo felt for the casket in his pouch, then left it where it was. We must get out of here, Rumo said. We must take advantage of the confusion and leave the city. You're right, said Smike. There's a lot to tell, but first let's get out of this hideous city. Yelma. No one dared to oppose the Wolpertines and Yetis when they withdrew from hell. The streets were dark and deserted. The few citizens to show their faces and hurriedly disappeared into the shadows. Yucabak and Ribble led the column because they knew the shortest route out of the city. Following them came Scullop the Scyther and his men, and the Wolpertines formed the rearguard. Rumo caught up with Scullop because he wanted to ask him something. Why did you follow me to hell? Why? Growled Scullop. Why did I march into the cogitating quicksand? Because I'm an idiot. You can say that again, called a Yeti behind them. Why, you ask? Scullop growled his black teeth. I'll tell you why. Certainly not for your sake. I did it for Yelma. Who's Yelma? Asked Rumo. Well, Scullop began, I thought about you for a long time after you left me, youngster. I went punting across that black lake, telling myself what a fool you were. Said Rumo. Then I burst out laughing. I laughed all day long, thinking about you and your crazy scheme. I mean, fancy going to hell to rescue your sweetheart from a whole army of devils, all on your own. Man, how I laughed. The Yeti behind Scullop bleated derisively. Rumo wasn't so sure why he really wanted to hear this story. And then I wept, said Scullop. Well, not really, because we dead Yetis can't shed tears. It's more like a kind of dry cough, but it amounts to the same thing. I wasn't weeping on your account, so don't think I was. I'm a hard-hearted old Yeti who couldn't care less what happens to anyone else. If my best friend, not that I have any friends, got struck by lightning right beside me, I wouldn't give a darn, you understand? Scullop turned his death's head and glanced at Rumo. I understand, said Rumo. No, I was weeping on my own account. I wept because I saw myself mirrored in you, not as old and dead and ugly as I am now, but as young and peppy as I used to be at your age. Rumo nodded. Scullop's voice had become higher and more youthful. I was worth 2, 3, no, half a dozen Yetis rolled into one. I didn't turn round to pee when the wind was blowing the wrong way. Not me. Other Yetis existed, it was true, but they lived in my world, and according to my rules, understand, I was Scullop the Scyther, and they knew I'd earned the nickname fair and square. My heart was on fire. You could put it that way, said the Yeti behind them. Scullop lowered his voice again. At that time, I was in love with a girl Yeti named Yelma. It's a really sad story, so I'll make it short. Yelma died. Some confounded disease carried her off in no time at all. If she'd gone to an evil kingdom full of devils, no matter where, I'd have dug there with my bare hands and brought her back, my Yelma. But there wasn't any evil kingdom. She was dead, that's all. Then I calmed down. I became calmer and older, and in the end dead myself, or almost. Well, you know what I mean. Scullop gave a dry cough and relapsed into silence for a while. And suddenly there you were, sitting in my punt and telling me how you were on your way to a kingdom full of devils to rescue your sweetheart. Just you and your cheese knife. And then, when you'd gone, I'd wept and laughed and racked my brains for long enough. I said to myself, why don't I follow that young fool? Why don't I go to this city full of devils and risk my neck again? If I don't, my Yelma will never forgive me, and I won't be able to show my face in the place where she is now, wherein I'm well and truly dead at last. Scullop coughed again. That, of course, was precisely what my men wanted me to say. Hey, men, I called, let's go to that city full of devils and save that crazy Wolpertine's stupid neck. Oh, sure, they called back. That's the best idea you've had since you marched us into the cogitating quicksand. The next person who brings up that GD quicksand business, I told them, I'll ram my punting hole down his throat and bury his head down in the bulrushes. That silenced them for a while, and I said, yes, you bunch of losers, I'm going to that city full of devils, whether you or not anyone comes with me. If you want to go on being dead, stay there for your stupid punts on the stinking lake of oil till it turns into coal. Go on dreaming of the old days. Me, I'm off to hell. I owe it to my Yelma. And you know what? Except for a small rear guard left behind to look after the punts, they all came along, every last one of them. Yes, said the Yeti behind them. We must be as daft as you are. Shall I tell you something else, said Scullop. It paid off. We defeated the copper killers. We showed the devils a thing or two. What's more, I saw that Rolla of yours, far too skinny for my taste. But it would have been a real shame if she'd stayed dead. It was a successful campaign. Scullop gave a conspiratorial grin. Did you give her the casket? No, Rumo muttered. Scullop looked puzzled. Why not? It hasn't come yet. What hasn't come yet? The right moment. When will that be? Soon, said Rumo. How soon is soon? Scullop insisted. Very soon, said Rumo. He slowed down and rejoined his friends. The Prince of Peace, Friptar, seated on Gornab's throne, was surveying the ruins of the theater of death. Down in the arena, his soldiers were busy driving a huge albino rat in a corner with their spears. The royal adviser could scarcely believe his luck. At the height of the greatest debacle since the Brahak Wars, fortune had decided to smile on him. That accursed tin-pot general? Just a distant memory. A myriad of metal splinters lodged in stones around him. A coppery sheen on the ruins of the theater of death, a vanished nightmare. The copper killers are harmless for you. The rebels put to flight, and King Gornab had let himself be talked into this Rawhawk adventure. Sorry, it's just like, out of nowhere, it was like, my tongue just kind of was like, failed. Could you imagine, like, sleeping till you fall asleep? That's not what I meant. Reading till you fall asleep. And King Gornab had let himself be talked out into this Rawhawk adventure, no matter how it turned out. Ruftar would have plenty of opportunities to foment rebellion among the king's subjects and turn the situation to his own advantage. To think what might have happened. A revolution, hell in flames. He himself might have been sentenced to death, lynched, executed. As things stood, he was well on the way to becoming the new monarch of hell. What a great and momentous day in the city's history, the greatest ever, perhaps. The end of the Gornabian dynasty, the beginning of the Friftarian. Friftar looked around the theater. He would have it restored. No, he would have it demolished and rebuilt 3 times as big. The Friftar Stadium would be a worthy monument to his eternal renown. Lining the area, the copper killers would make splendid statues reminiscent of a bygone age. You could already hear the masses cheering and Friftar the Forceful instead of degenerate Gornab. Yes, that's what he wanted to be called, the Forceful, for it was vigor and self-discipline, tears and sweat that had brought him to where he was today, on the throne. He would be the first ruler of hell to be governed by reason, not insanity. A prince of peace, a philosopher king, Friftar rose to acknowledge the imaginary plaudits of the masses and abruptly sat down again. Hey, why weren't his legs obeying him? His thighs felt icy cold. His calves couldn't feel it all. No need to panic. The last few hours had been extremely stressful. He needed to rest a while, that was all. But strangely enough, the chill tide continued to surge up his body, his chest, his arms, his neck, his face. All felt as if they were turning to ice. His features became rigid and immobile. His temples were transfixed by a pain like the thrust of a stiletto blade. The clicking inside his head had started again. Cold sweat was gathering on his brow. Surely he wasn't falling seriously ill. Not now, of all times. Lord of the Vrahawks. It took a few days to equip all the Vrahawks. Then they were woken and hypnotized afresh for their long march. The commander in chief of the Hellion army wanted to go into battle with every available Vrahawk, even the biggest, so he had to take the route via Gornab's Echo, the most voluminous cave in Netherworld. The huge beasts would have found other routes to Wolverting impassable or obstructed by insurmountable barriers such as the precipitous cave known as Vrahawk's End. Gornab had spent the whole time in his tent, humored with difficulty by a band of nervous courtiers, whenever he wasn't in a deep sleep induced by the drugs Riptar had given him for the journey. When they finally set off, the king plus throne and tent, were winched onto the back of the biggest rawhawk and strapped to the platform already anchored there. Gornab's mood alternated between euphoria and hysterical fear. The effects of the various drugs on his nervous system were such that he sometimes felt like screaming with terror and sometimes shook with violent paroxysms of laughter. His view of Netherworld from the rawhawk's back was genuinely breathtaking, and the creature progressed so calmly and steadily on its 12 colossal legs, the motion was almost imperceptible up there. After a few hours, Gornab felt unassailable, more powerful than ever before. He was lord of the rawhawks, commander of the most formidable army hell had ever unleashed. Looking back over his shoulder, he could see them all, scores of rawhawks of every size, docilely plodding along behind him, amid the squadrons of fluttering dogbats, on which his soldiers were mounted. So this was what invincibility looked like, far better than the theater of death. Even the stench of the rawhawks seemed delicious, and the alarming noises they made rang in Gornab's ear like music. The column soon reached Gornab's echo. Subterranean chambers down the air were so gigantic that even the rawhawks resembled insects, crawling across the floor of a cave. Each carried between them 10 and 100 soldiers, depending on its side, and the beasts themselves provided most of the light because their blue intestines glowed more brightly the darker it became. For additional illumination, torches and fires in iron tubs had been lit on the backs of the largest specimens. Our pride and joy. The rawhawks were covering vast distances at every step. Gornab feasted his eyes on the morbid beauty of his sinister kingdom. Wonderful the way the primeval beast's fearsome shadows flitted across the cavern walls, disturbing flocks of clamorous cacarbats and driving them into the darkness. Gornab had never dreamt that the kingdom ruled so vast. Great indeed were the Gornabs. He could hear the voices in his head spurring them on. Onward, onward, lord of the rawhawks, fulfiller of the red prophecy, king of hell, blood of our blood, brain of our brain, our beloved son, our pride and joy. The torchlight carved miraculous spectacles out of the gloom. Stalagmites bigger than the biggest rawhawk loomed up in the darkness like giants asleep on their feet. Moths with huge metallically gleaming wings circled Gornab's throne with a sound like thunder as sheets in action. Cascades of sparkling multicolored rocks seemed to plunge down the sides of the cavern like enormous waterfalls, a breathtaking sight. All Netherworld was putting on a show for its ruler above her. Gornab laughed and shouted and fidgeted around on his throne. The red prophecy was coming true. This was a triumphal progress, and it wouldn't be his last. Below was above, right was left, war was good, peace was bad. Gornab had never felt so omnipotent. Skull leads the way. Yukovak and Ribble had warned the Wolpertings that the Hellings would probably mobilize the rawhawks and pursue them. Scullop, who knew the routes through Netherworld best, had been tacitly elected to lead the party. To prevent the rawhawks from following them, he led the Wolpertings along narrow ravines, winding the passages and tunnels with little headroom. They traversed a world ruled by deaf, sightless creatures, insects that found their way around with their antennae. The fact that noises didn't startle them led to some unexpected encounters in the darkness. The caves were damp, the rocks jagged and slippery, and the marchers had to be careful to avoid the deep fissures that often yawned in their path. Many stretches had to be covered in total darkness because no phosphorescent algae grew there, and a strong smell of oil precluded the use of torches. It was bitterly cold most of the time, and the frozen moisture made every step hazardous. As if eager to make up for the time she had lost inside the Metal Maiden, Rala had grown steadily wilder, and more restless since returning from the realm of death. She was constantly on the move, sometimes up front with the Yeti, sometimes bringing up the rear with the Wolpertings, but always on spot with her bow up on spot with her bow, whenever danger threatened in the shape of some huge insects or other subterranean creature. One could literally see the life flooding back into her. Her movements were becoming more lithe, her footsteps swifter, her limbs stronger. Together with Urs, Roll, Vasco, and Bala, Rumo formed the rearguard, whose job it was to defend the party against attacks from behind. Yukovak and Ribble had joined them, whereas Smike and Calibri traveled with the older Wolpertings. But all who took part in this march from one pool of darkness to the next were dependent on themselves. Having formerly been captives in the evil heart of Netherworld, they were now crawling through its entrails, and none of them could have said which was worse. They did not call a halt for 3 days. The Yetis needed no rest or sleep, but the Wolpertines, especially the older ones among them, were beginning to flag despite their natural stamina and resilience. A fire was lit in one of the smaller, more easily defended caves. Most members of the party went to sleep right away, but some of them, including Rumo, Urs, Rolf, Rala, Yukabak, Ribble, Mayor, Jowly, Sculp, Smike, and Professor Calibri gathered around the blaze to swap accounts of their recent experiences. Swapping stories. Many tales were told during this interlude, and it is highly improbable that any stories ever recounted around a campfire could have been more extraordinary. Rala told of being imprisoned inside her own body, of Talon the bear god, and the hideous face of fear in her flight through her own bloodstream, and the terrible soldiers of death she had encountered there. Ribble described the Yeti's heroic battle with the Copper Killers. He told of headless warriors fighting on by the light of incandescent splinters of iron, of Skull Scyther's titanic fury and the destructive power of his mighty weapon, and he described the origins of homunculi and their wretched way of life. Yukabak confessed to what he'd done in the cellars of the Theater of Death, his release of the red spider and the crystal scorpion and the albino rat, and described the Wolpertine's fight with General TikTok. He also gave a short history of hell that included the building of the urban fly traps and the training of the Brahawks. It was only now that most of the Wolpertines learned the truth about Gornab, Friftar, and the Theater of Death. Professor Ostafan Calibri, who contributed a scientifically accurate description of the Merkholm and the jelly fog that prevailed there, described what it felt like to go temporarily mad in 4 brains at once. Smike, needless to say, spoke longer and better than anyone else. He presented a verbose and detailed account of his voyage through Rala's coagulating blood, his encounter with the non-existent teenies. At this, Calibri's eyes glowed brighter than anyone else's, and his duel with the Soldier of Death, whose spine he had snapped. His one minor omission related to certain events that had occurred at Thinworm Castle. Sculp the Scyther told the story of the dead Yetis and described his first meeting with Rumo, how the latter had almost brought down half Netherworld by shouting and what a fool he'd been to go to hell armed with a cheese knife. Last of all, Urs rose and described how Ushan DeLuca had met his end while defying General TikTok unarmed. TikTok was already holding Ushan's heart in his hand by the time Urs grasped that the fencing master's sole motive had been to save his life. Consequently, he felt it was his duty to continue Ushan's life's work and devote himself to the art of swordsmanship from now on. Many had tears in their eyes when Urs resumed his seat. Only Rumo said nothing. He meant to speak more than once, but before he could collect his thoughts and open his mouth, someone else got in first. He didn't regret this because he knew that, as usual, he would have got everything back to front. Finally, when exhaustion had reduced them all to silence and they were trying to grab a little restorative sleep for the march to come, Criddle and Dandelion made their presence felt. "Why didn't you say anything?" Dandelion demanded. "Our own experiences would surely have made the best story of all. The fight in Nern Forest, Yggdrasil, the casket, the Ice Gods, the Frauhawks, General TikTok's innards, ideal subjects for inclusion in lessons on the heroic sagas." "I'm no good at telling stories," Rumo protested. "Instead of that, you let Sculp the Scyther make fun of you," said Dandelion. "Great. If that's your way of looking good in front of Rala, I give up." "You should have killed Sculp when you still had the chance," said Crindle. "Does that mean you've lost your desire to kill Sculp?" Dandelion asked him. "Why the change of heart, you merciless demonic warrior?" "We still need him," Crindle growled. "First he must guide us to the Netherworld. Then we'll kill him." Brahawk's repose. Gornab had retired to his tent and was trying to get some sleep, but it was strange. The more wine and sleeping draughts he poured down his throat, the wider awake he felt. "I'm a Dreyf," he whispered to himself under the blood codes. Why should I be a Dreyf?" He dashed out of the tent into the torchlight and over the rail enclosing his platform on the Frahawk's back. His dark kingdom stretched away far below, the blue stalagmites protruding from the oily water. Why did he suddenly find this view of the depths so alarming? He went to the rear of the platform. There they were, his rawhawks, his soldiers, his army. Scores of gigantic beasts were plodding through the gloom of Rawhawk's repose, yet another cavern on the route to Overworld. Dogbats were howling and lashing the air with their leathering wings. Why did he now find the view so ominous? Why was he feeling like a fugitive, bereft of protection? The vast cavern seemed to sway in the fitful blue glow, shed by the Rawhawks, and each of the countless stalagmites jutting from the floor resembled a finger raised in warning. Did these pursuing long-legged shadows belong to the Rawhawks or to the subterranean demons? Ice-cold drops of water spattered Gornab's head. Why wasn't Friptar there to reassure him? Why was he so alone? The king of Netherworld leaned over the rail and vented his fear into the darkness. Tarfrift, he shouted, Tarfrift, why do I leave so adrave? The membrane. For the first time, this trek through the bowels of the earth made it clear to the Wolpertines what a merciless world they had blithely lived above until now, how thin was the crust that separated them from it, and how great the danger that its savage, evil inhabitants might one day burst forth to wreak death and destruction in Overworld. They saw yards-long worms armed with pincers, plate-sized phosphorescent ants of every hue, peat-dwelling spiders whose groans would have melted the hardest heart. The layer separating Overworld from Netherworld seemed no more than a membrane penetrable by any evil creature evil enough to pierce it. This was a world where dead things came to life again, where corpses turned into maggots and other vermin, where decaying matter produced new growth, and dangerous nerds were born of very life. It was a cruel, implacable world, full of greedy predators. The higher they climbed, the looser the soil, and the more crackling, burrowing, lip-smacking sounds they heard on every side. The Wolpertines' journey through Netherworld welded them together more closely than all their previous experiences. Each was responsible for his neighbor, and each step proved disastrous or fatal for all. Danger lurked everywhere. Never had they taken greater care of each other. Having completed the strenuous ascent from hell by way of Stonewater Grotto and the maze of tunnels and small caves, they reached Deadwood. With its huge tree-like stalagmites and eternal pall of mist, its ape-like denizens kept out of sight, possibly for fear of attacking such a large party. Their unnerving screams were all that could be heard, and big stones occasionally fell from the mist overhead. Although Rumo warned his companions not to eat the black mushrooms, the Yetis brushed his advice aside and tucked into them. They were in exuberant mood for trees, hurling stones at the invisible apes and giggling foolishly to themselves. At some stage, the first Kronks appeared, the furry little hook-beaked creatures that were the Netherworld's original inhabitants, and Rumo knew Nern Forest could not be far off. He joined Skulk in the Scyther. He joined Skulk the Scyther at the head of this column. We'll soon have to go through the Nern Forest labyrinth, he said. Why? It's the way I came. Skulk focused his empty eye sockets on Rumo. You went right through Nern Forest? Yes, said Rumo, didn't you? Of course not, Skulk laughed. We've got more sense. But the only route from the Frigida Caves to hell goes that way. What gives you that idea? Hey, just a minute. You mean to say you went by way of the Frigida Caves? They're swarming with ice magogs. I know, said Rumo. Skulk chuckled dryly. Then you picked the most dangerous route through Netherworld, my boy. Congratulations. Hey, lot, he called to the other Yetis. This youngster here went breezing through the Frigida Caves and through the Nern Forest labyrinth. So why is he still in the land of the living? One of them called back. Skulk grinned. Every time you open your mouth, my friend, I doubt your sanity a little bit more. Why didn't you go via the Rawhawk Caves while you were at it? Rumo made no comment. There's a dead straight route that avoids the Frigida Caves and Nern Forest. That's the one we took. So why didn't you tell me when I asked you? Said Rumo. You told me there were various routes through Netherworld, that's all. Which wasn't a lie, Skulk retorted. Riftar and Extremis. No one, whether soldier, physician, or alchemist, had dared to approach Riftar. What was happening to the royal advisor seated on the throne of Gornab the 99th was indescribable, unspeakable, and without doubt highly infectious. They all felt threatened by the mere sight of him. Even at the respectful distance, and hurriedly took to their heels. This was why Frithgar soon found himself alone in the theatre of death, the sole performer in a final production staged before an audience of the dead. But what was happening to the exterior of his body was only a pale reflection of what was going on inside of him. The subcutaneous Suicide Squad's activities in Frithgar's bloodstream surpassed anything that had ever taken place in the arena. And no impresario, not even Frithgar himself, could have devised scenes of such ingenious cruelty. It was only now that the subcutaneous Suicide Squad's capacity for mutation attained its true objective, which was to inflict as many different forms of pain as possible. Needles and pincers, poisons and acids were brought into play. The agonies Frithgar had to endure were worse than some of all the pain that had been inflicted in the theatre of death, and they took their time, for it was only in Frithgar's body that Tychonsypho's disease disclosed the full extent of its horror. No dream. Gornab awoke from a restless sleep with his ears ringing. What an awful nightmare! He'd been riding a Brahawk pursued by gigantic demons who bombarded him with pointed stalactites somewhere a long way from hell. His ancestors had cavorted around and jeered at him for being a coward. It was frightful. Where was Frithgar with his breakfast? The king got out of bed, tottered over to the curtain, stark naked, and drew it aside. He jumped back with a smothered cry of terror. Stretching away in front of him was a vast cavern, and fluttering through the air above were squadrons of dog bats ridden by soldiers holding torches. The torchlight illuminated the back of the Brahawk beneath him, which was wheezing heavily. The air reeked of oil and seawater, and huge menacing stalactites hung from the roof of the cavern. Gornab tottered back inside, drew the curtain, and recovered his wits at last. With a shudder, he realized that it hadn't been a dream after all. He was Lord of the Brahawks, and Frithgar and hell were far, far away. It was all he could do not to drink a pint of sleeping draught and crawl back under the bedclothes. Your Majesty, said a voice from outside. Are you awake? Yes, Gornab replied peevishly. I am. You'll be pleased to hear that the bulk of our journey is now behind us, said the voice, which belonged to one of his generals. According to our calculations, it's not beyond the bounds of the possibility that our decisive encounter with the Wolpertings will occur before the day is out. Yes, yes, Gornab said impatiently. Waff of it? I mention it only because we shall require your final orders by then at the latest. Yes, yes, said Gornab. You'll tag them in Dugmite. Orders, he thought. No problem there. He need only decree that the Brahawks devour those stupid Wolpertings. What was so difficult about that? He took a swig of some fortifying potion and donned his royal robe. Then he waddled out of the tent. Oil Lake once more. The route Scullop was taking them led through small caves and low tunnels that harbored no creatures of the wild or other unpleasantness apart from crocs and cackerbats. Rumo silently cursed Scullop for omitting to tell him about the shortcut. On the other hand, he wouldn't have bumped into Yugoback and Ribble, and who knew how his venture would have turned out then. Fate allowed a route of its own. It wasn't always the shortest. Wolpertings could scent Oil Lake hours before they reached it, and Rumo was surprised that a smell which had caused him such uneasiness the first time should now seem almost reassuring. This was the last leg of the journey they would have to cover with outside help. They were almost home. A small rear guard of Yetis was waiting for their companions on the shores of Oil Lake. Little was said. Scullop growled for a few brief orders, and his men proceeded to load their punts with passengers. At another word of command from Scullop, the fleet pushed off and disappeared into the luminous mist. For the first time, the fugitives seemed to lose a little of the uneasiness that had spurred them on throughout their journey. The Yetis proudly told the rearguard about their defeat of the Copper Killers, and many of the Wolpertings took advantage of the crossing to get some sleep. Rollo sat silent in the bow of the punt in which Rumo was traveling. Whatever the reason, her reassuring presence, or the gentle gliding motion of the punt, or the rhythmical gurgle of the oil, or probably sheer exhaustion, Rumo fell asleep sitting up. A lethal misunderstanding. We're there, Your Majesty, someone called into the royal tent's dark interior. We've completed our ascent and are now advancing on Oil Lake. The scouts were sent out, mounted on dog bats, report that the Wolpertings are crossing the lake at this moment. We respectfully await your orders. Gornab gave a surly grunt. Duties, nothing but duties. He wanted to get this business over with as quickly as possible and return to hell, so he rose from his bed with a groan and went outside. They were in a cave that was smaller and lighter than Gornab's echo and warmer than the glacial cavern known as Brahawk's repose. All the rocks were bathed in a phosphorescent glow, and luminous blue rain was falling from the stalactites overhead. Looking out over the rail of his observation platform, the king saw dense swaths of mist snaking between his rawhawk's legs. He felt dizzy and shrank away from the rail. Half a dozen generals, all members of the Hellion aristocracy. I don't know why, when I'm tired, I stumble over this. Aristocracy were standing at attention on the platform awaiting their monarch's orders. After a considerable time, when none were issued, and Gornab nearly gazed at the rawhawks behind him, lost in thought, one of them spoke up. "It's high time we devoted some thought to our future course of action, Your Majesty. Frithar gave orders that we weren't to trouble you with unnecessary problems, but he also expressly instructed me to consult you at this stage in the campaign. The order to attack can only come from you." "Yes," said Gornab. "Doog." The generals looked at him expectantly. "Why are you pogging at me like that?" Gornab snapped. "Your orders, Majesty," one of them ventured to say. "Are we to wait until the Wolpertings have returned to their city, or do we attack them without delay? If we want to fulfill the Red Prophecy, we should really wait until they're home. The Red Prophecy explicitly refers to a war in the overworld." Gornab thought hard. Things were getting complicated after all. Why hadn't that idiot Frithar said anything about this? Fulfill the Red Prophecy or attack right away? Couldn't he attack at once and then order the historians to record that he'd fulfilled the prophecy anyway? Yes, that was it. He was the king, after all. Get it over now, right away, and hightail it home to hell. He drew a deep breath. "I sidere the Hawkfrost to a cat and Tresdoi, the Tinkerwolves, without Leday," he commanded. The general stared at him. "Your pardon, Majesty?" said one of them. Gornab cleared his throat. "I sidere the Hawkfrost to a cat and Tresdoi, the Tinkerwolves, without Leday," he repeated, somewhat louder. The generals exclaimed nervous glances. Such a situation had never arisen before. No one had ever had to tell the king to his face, but he was unintelligible. "Are you fed?" Gornab demanded, brusquely now. "I vague orders that the dumgooded Hawkfrost slud a cat and Tresdoi the Tinkerwolves without Leday. Is that so faculted to Dentersund?" "I'm sorry, Your Majesty," one of the generals said bravely, "but we don't understand your orders." The others glared at him as though he just sentenced them to death. Gornab's voice took on a low, menacing note. "You told Dentersund me?" he said. "Do I speak indistinctly? Do I fusser from a sheep's fedect or thingsome?" A foul stench drifted towards them from Oil Lake, and the huge rawhawk shied in alarm. Everyone on the platform lurched to and fro. Gornab suddenly quietened. His sardonic grin became even broader, but his face went blank. Voices were speaking in his head, the voices of his dead answers. "Can you hear us, Gornab?" they asked. "It's us." "The Gornab's inside you." Gornab listened spellbound. The voices at last, they would tell him what to do. "We're proud of you, Gornab. Proud because you're blood of our blood, brain of our brain, mighty lord of the Rawhawks. Are you going to take that insult lying down? An insult leveled at your royal person? They act as if they fail to understand your orders. They act as if you're an idiot who can't make himself understood. They want to override you and take command themselves. You can't permit that, Gornab. In the name of all the Gornabs, you must punish them. Punish them, Gornab, punish them." It was all over by the time the king awoke from his trance. One of the generals lay stretched out on his back, twitching, the blood spurting from a gash in his throat. The others had recoiled in horror. Gornab struggled to his feet. He felt infinitely weary, as he always did after committing such atrocities. "What's the matter?" he shouted one of the Vrahawk drivers from the near platform. "The Vrahawk is getting out of control." The gigantic creature was trembling. Its armor-plated back vibrated beneath their feet, and it came to a halt, whistling in a restive, feverish manner. Gornab wiped the blood from his mouth. "What's born with it?" he asked. "What's up with the Hawkfrost?" The scent of blood. The armor-plated beast vibrated more violently still, and the digestive juices in its intestines began to seethe. "It can smell blood," cried one of the generals. "The hypnosis is wearing off." "Your Majesty," another general shouted at the king, "how could you have shed blood aboard a Vrahawk? All that interests it now is blood. Don't you know anything about the beast? No, Gornab didn't, nor did he need to. He was the king. He dared this underling address him in such a fashion. He flew at the general's throat, ripping out the Adam's apple with his teeth. He spat it over the rail. There, he said, Hapsortath will cheat you to address me so disrespectfully. Gornab released his victim. The general sagged against the rail, breathing stertorously and trying to plug the gaping wound with his fingers. Meanwhile, his blood went spurting over the Brahawk. I'm cating over Mokand, Gornab bellowed. Where are the Tinger whoops? I intend to exterminate them. It sounded like violent wind arose, and the Brahawk's transparent trunk came slithering over the edge of its armor-plated back. Purposefully, it made for the platform, then for the first of the bleeding generals. The tube squelched open and sucked them in. The Brahawk emitted loud whistles of excitement as the man shot it up its like a lifeless puppet. The trunk reared up briefly, quivering with greed, then closed over the second bleeding general and adjusted him too. Then done, it scoured the platform in search of further nourishment. The surviving generals yelled at the Brahawk drivers, but they had lost control a long time ago. Some of them were already preparing to winch themselves to the ground in the baskets that served as lifeboats. Gornab dashed over to his throne, ensconced himself in it, and strapped himself in with his royal safety belt. I am the Jink, he cried. Hotfra, I mokand you to eboy me. The trunk came writhing across the platform, sucking up soldier after soldier. Irrespective of rank, some of the men preferred to jump for it rather than end up in the Brahawk's digestive organs, and the air rang with senseless orders and despairing cries. Similar chaos reigned aboard the Brahawks behind them. All were awakening from their alchemical hypnosis and extending their trunks. The greedy whistling grew louder. The crows on the platforms panicked and desperately showered the Brahawks with alchemical extracts and tried to abseil down them. Anyone who failed to escape was engulfed in their bellowing trunks, which also plucked dog bats out of the air, complete with their riders. Gornab clung to his throne. Above him, a wind had sprung up that tore fiercely at his limbs and greedily sucked in anything lying around loose. A briefcase full of military maps, sundry weapons, several canteens, a shield bearing the arms of hell. Gornab looked up. The tip of the biggest Brahawk's trunk was hovering immensely overhead. The Gornab of Gornabs. But the king wasn't afraid. His gaze was ecstatic. His grin ran from ear to ear. He was listening to the voices of his ancestors. Fear not, Gornab, they cried. You are the Gornab of Gornabs, the ruler of the netherworld. Nothing can harm you. Nothing can harm us. We are immortal. No, he wasn't in any real danger. They weren't in any real danger, not then. The kings of hell were immortal. His belt would hold no matter how much suction the raging wind exerted. Gornab sat glued to his throne. I am Nograb Angel, Akadarzo, Ned Lele, Anuta, the Sniny Thin. He yelled at the greedy mouth of the tube above him. I am the Jink. I am the Norgab of Norgabs. I mokand you to. The first of the bolts that secured the throne of the platform gave way and went whistling past his ears. I mokand you to eboy me. There was a crack in the Gornab saw whole sections of the platform beneath him break away and fly upwards. The throne seemed to be rocked by an earthquake. I mokand you. Another crack, and this time Gornab himself rose into the air. The last legitimate ruler was anointed with corrosive acids, as he and his throne were sunk into the digestive organs of the biggest of all living Brahawks. I'm really tired right now, so this is even funnier when you're tired. The scent of death. Rumo awoke. No noise had roused him. No cry or nudge in the ribs. I mean, it is funny, but it's funnier when you're sleepy. Or nudge in the ribs, what a smell! Drowsily he raised his head and sniffed the air. It was the alarming, unnerving smell of roaming rock. The stench of thousands of rotting marine parasites, the smell of death that seemed to have pursued him throughout his life. The demonicals are coming, he said sleepily. Demonicals? Urs, who was sitting on the plinth just ahead of him, turned around. No, it's the Brahawks. Rumo's head gradually cleared. A lot of them, too, judging by the smell. Why can't we hear anything? Asked Urs. I've seen Brahawks wade across the lake before now, said the Yeti who was pulling them along. They make their way through the oil as slowly and silently as ghosts. It's weird. They instinctively know how dangerous it is to set off rockfalls in this cave. How many are there? Burris asked. Several dozens of them at a guess, said Rumo. All the Hellings possess, perhaps. It's not much further to the other side, said the Yeti. We'll make it. Rawhawks can go anywhere, said Rumo. Even up the steps to Wolperting if they have to. We must fight them off. The first punts had already landed. Their passengers helped the latter arrivals ashore. As soon as all the Wolpertings and Yetis were on dry land, they held a council of war. You can't be serious, said Scullop. You can't fight the Rawhawks. They're too many for you. We've no choice, Rumo retorted. We must stop them from reaching the surface. We're all that stands between them and overworld. I know how to neutralize the creatures. We must let them suck us up, and then Scullop laid a bony hand on Rumo's shoulder and threw back his cowl to reveal his glistening, greasy black skull. He ground his teeth. Look, youngster, you really don't have to keep proving to me how crazy you are. You haven't a hope against the Rawhawks. I already dealt with one of them, Rumo said. Oh, sure, of course you did. Scullop gave an incredulous, despairing laugh. So fierce was the stench drifting across the lake that it nearly took their breath away. Still partly obscured by the luminous mist, the Rawhawks were advancing almost without a sound. The Rawhawks are coming. Everyone thronged to the shore to watch them approach. They waded slowly through the oil with infinite care, guided by their restless antennae. All that could be heard was the grinding and creaking of the joints of their enormous legs as their bodies loomed out of the mist and swayed ever nearer. There must indeed have been hundreds of them, all the Rawhawks in Netherworld. Scullop and his men who had detached themselves from the Wolpertings were conferring in grunts and murmurs at the edge of the lake. Their discussion was punctuated by angry growls and savage laughter. Then Scullop came back on his own. All right, my lad, he said, stationing himself in front of Rumo with his scythe. I understand. This is between you and me. Rumo stared at him uncomprehendingly. I'm going to show you, Rumo. I'm going to show you which of us is the crazier. What are you getting at? Said Rumo. Scullop gave a ferocious grunt and turned to the rest of the Wolpertings. Listen here, you're going to do exactly as I say. Either stay or run away. It's all the same to me, but don't dare butt in. Watch the fun or make yourself scarce, whichever. In your place, though, I'd watch. It'll be worth seeing, I guarantee you. Scullop laid his hand on Rumo's shoulder again. It was an honor knowing you, Rumo. You're a genuine nutcase. Rumo was still puzzled. What are you planning to do? He asked. Never you mind, Scullop retorted. This is Yeti business, but you must promise me something. What's that? Promise me you'll give her that GD casket. Rumo nodded and hung his head. Scullop turned and strode over to his men, who had already begun to board their punts. The Wolpertings conferred and whispered. What were the Yetis up to? The Yetis pushed off. Scullop, leaning on his scythe in the biggest punt, addressed the Wolpertings once more. He kept his voice down just as he had when Rumo met him for the first time. I'll tell you something else, he whispered. If I have ever met a genuine hero, it's that young maniac whose name sounds like a card game. However, I'm pretty sure my men and I can go one better, so keep your eyes peeled. Watch Scullop and his army of dead Yetis at work, and watch closely, because we're about to break a few records. History is being made here. Tell your grandchildren about it, but tell it properly, or the ghost of Scullop the Scyther will return in the night and cut your throats with his scythe. A swath of luminous blue mist drifted over the punts and enveloped them. All that could now be heard were the clicks and creaks of the advancing Rawhawks' knee joints. That was a pretty self-assured announcement, Yuccaback said after a while. Do they really intend to fight the Rawhawks? Asked Ribble. It would be suicide, said Yuccaback. They don't stand a chance, certainly not in those cockle shells of theirs. Maybe they know of a place to hide. Everyone stood and rooted to the spot, watching spellbound as the mist dispersed and the punts came into view again. The dead Yetis had risen to their feet and were drifting towards the oncoming Rawhawks. The primeval beast's huge legs formed an intricate silhouette tinged with blue by the glow from their throbbing intestines. By now the Rawhawks and the punts could not have been more than a couple of 100 yards apart. Even if Scullop and his men had wanted to do so, it was too late for them to change their minds and turn around. The blood song. Shall we sing, men? Scullop cried suddenly, with such volume and clarity that his words easily carried to the Wolpertings' ears. Yes, let's sing, someone called back. A splendid idea of yours, Scullop, as usual, the Yetis laughed. The Wolpertings continued to line the shore, completely at a loss. What are they doing? Asked Rolla. Rumo pointed to the stalactites of the roof of the cavern. They're laying down their lives for us, he said. The stench of the oncoming Rawhawks was becoming more and more intolerable. Rumo gripped the hilt of the sword in impotent fury. He's sacrificing himself, said Crindle. Scullop the Scyther is sacrificing himself. They all are, said Dandelion. Who knows a good song? Cried Scullop. The Blood Song, a Yeti replied. It's the only one we know. Good, said Scullop. Let's have the Blood Song then. He cleared his throat. Blood must spurt and blood must flow, he sang. Let blood gush from every foe. Blood as far as I can see. Blood to all eternity. Blood must spurt and blood must flow. Chorused the other Yetis. Let blood gush from every foe. Blood as far as I can see. Blood to all eternity. The echoes of their grisly song filled the cavern and sent bats fluttering into the air. Swing the sword with all your might, sang Scullop. Cleave your foe from head to heel. Let your blade his innards bite, the Yetis joined in. Lay them open with cold steel. Blood must spurt and blood must flow, they all sang together. Let blood gush from every foe. With a sharp report, a gigantic stalactite broke off the roof of the cavern. It plummeted downwards like a spear, pierced the armor-plated back of one of the biggest rawhawks, passed right through it, and emerged from its underbelly, ripping the blue stomach to shreds on the way. Finally, it landed in the lake with a muffled splash, followed by cascades of intestines and pale blue slime. The rawhawks continued to stand there for a moment, trumpeting pathetically. Then all 12 legs buckled, and it collapsed like a dilapidated tower. The creature's trumpeting and the sounds of its fall went echoing around the cavern. More sharp reports rang out, this time from many parts of the roof at once, and a barrage of enormous stalactites came raining down on the rawhawks, the Yetis, and the lake. Numerous punts were hit and sank into the oil, and dozens of rawhawks met the same fate. Panic broke out among them. They stampeded in all directions, howling, whistling, and bellowing, colliding and falling on top of each other. Netherworld had never heard such a pandemonium. The roof's caving in, someone shouted. The Wolpertines came to life with a jerk, but it was a moment before they could tear their eyes away from the horrific spectacle. Then they turned and started to run faster and faster. Rumo seized Rala's paw, and they sprinted off together. Far behind them, colossal stalactites continued to fall into the lake, churning the oil into waves that knocked many of the rawhawks off their feet and swamped the Yeti's punts. The Wolpertines ran for their lives. Stalactites started to fall and explode among their fleeing figures. Even on dry land, and showers of small stones came rattling down on them. The rawhawks' trumpetings died away. The few that were still on their feet lashed the air with their tentacles. A rumble louder than any previous sound filled the cavern, and a huge black mass of sand, soil, and rock engulfed the surviving monsters, burying them beneath it. The echo reverberated around the cavern a while longer, then silence fell. The Wolpertines were still running, but now the first of them slowed down. Rumo and Rala, too, came to a halt and looked back. A dense cloud of stone dust was billowing into the air, shutting out the nightmarish scene like a curtain. They all looked up. The roof of the cavern was still intact. It had merely unleashed an avalanche of rocks sufficient to destroy the biggest creatures of the netherworld, and with them Scullop the Scyther and his gallant dead Yetis. Mayor Jolly of Gloomberg was standing not far from Rala and Rumo. He patted the dust from his fur, looked around, and said, "Right, now let's all go home." The alchemists triumphed. The fight was over, but the real battle, the truly great one, had still to be fought. Tychon Xiphus' subcutaneous suicide squad arose from the dust of Frithgar, former royal counselor and director of the Theatre of Death, who had died in such agony. Having finally laid Frithgar low, stopped his heart beating, and devoured his limbs and organs cell by cell, the subcutaneous suicide squad abandoned the meager remains of its vanquished foe, a handful of bone dust, in search of new life to destroy. It soared across the theater's deserted auditorium, through the prisoner's empty cell block, and over the Copper Killer's gallery, but all it found were bodies in which its work had already been accomplished by others. The invisible microscopic army reached the outer wall of the theater and surmounted it. At last, below the subcutaneous suicide squad, stretching away in all directions, lay a city filled with life, so it swooped down on hell in fulfillment of a Tychon Xiphus' dying curse. May hell and all who dwell there be destroyed from within, just like me. Black Dome Square. Wolpertines were setting foot in Black Dome Square for the first time since Rumo had descended into Netherworld. They emerged from the gloomy shaft one by one. Twilight was falling, but the dark blue sky was almost cloudless. The Wolpertines drank in the fresh air and bathed in the warming rays of the setting sun. Many shook themselves as if trying to slough off the smell and recollection of the Netherworld. More and more of them gathered round the black hole until the entire square and surrounding streets were thronged with Wolpertines. No one made a move to leave. All were waiting for some pronouncement that would relieve the tension by drawing a permanent line between their recent experiences and their future existence. All eyes turned to the mayor, who had sought, found, and polished the appropriate words while climbing the long staircase. Jolly of Gloomberg cleared his throat. The murmurs died away, and he uttered the historic sentence, "I'll take a darned big lid to plug a hole as ugly as this." No one spoke, no one moved, no one said "hear, hear," or clapped. They weren't exactly the words the Wolpertings had been expecting, words that would do justice to their tribulations and merit inclusion in the city's annals. They knew that they were the right words, however, so they went their separate ways, the skilled craftsmen among them already devoting thought to what material such a lid should be made of. "Did I say something wrong?" the mayor asked. "No," replied someone. "You hit the nail on the head." It was Walton Smike, who was standing beside him with Professor Ostafon Calibri. The mayor wondered briefly whether hitting the nail on the head was a snide reference to the notch in his cranium. Then he brushed the thought aside. He was on duty. The presence of outsiders in the city created an entirely new and, politically speaking, extremely awkward situation. Hitherto, no outsiders had been admitted on principle, but he could hardly throw them out. He had been largely instrumental in the rescue. He himself owed them his relief from imprisonment. They had saved Rala's life. What he wanted now was a hospitable gesture of some kind. Heavens alive, this was a situation that required him to devise a diplomatically sensitive form of words for the second time in a few minutes. "We should be glad to share our city with any well-disposed wayfarers," Jolly of Gloomberg said at length. Phew! Fortunately, the traditional greeting laid down by the Atlantean Hiker's Code had popped into his head just in time. He had merely substituted city for campfire and pluralized wayfarer. "Oh," Smike replied, "we thank you for your offer of hospitality, and promise," Professor Calibri chimed in gravely, "not to take undue advantage of it." "That takes care of them," thought the mayor, feeling relieved. "But what am I to do with the other outsiders, the ones that hail from Netherworld?" He looked over at them anxiously. Yuccaback and Ribble were standing together in the last rays of the setting sun. "The air is breathable," said Yuccaback, panting hard. "If it's poisonous, the poison must be slow-acting." "The sun doesn't seem to be scorching us," said Ribble, shielding himself with his pincers. "It isn't melting us or anything. Wait until midday tomorrow." Urs was standing beside them, grinning. "That's when it attains its full intensity." Yuccaback looked surprised. "You mean the sunshine varies in strength?" "The sun will go down at any moment," Urs told him. "Then it won't shine at all. Then it'll get cold and dark." "Where do you intend to spend the night?" Yuccaback shrugged. "We haven't thought about it yet," Ribble replied. "Come to my place, then. I've an idea. There'll be room going begging at our house in Hoth Street from now on." Urs jerked his head in the direction of Rumo and Rala, who were still standing silently in the middle of the square. Wolperting comes back to life. "Would you care to see me home?" Rala asked at length. "It'll be dark soon, and the streets in the city are said to be exceptionally dangerous." "All right," said Rumo. They walked through the streets in silence. The houses were coming back to life. Shutters were flung open, candles lit, blankets shaken. Laughter and the clatter of crockery could be heard on all sides. Wolperting was being aired. At last they reached Rala's door. Rala looked at Rumo. She raised her left forearm and parted the silky fur to reveal a painless scar. It read, "Rumo." Then she went into the house, leaving the door ajar behind her. Rumo shut his eyes. Yes, there it was, the silver thread, and it led through the doorway into Rala's house. "Go on," said Dandelion. Rumo followed Rala inside, his legs shaking, his paw tightly gripping the hilt of his sword as if in search of support. "Show her the casket," Dandelion whispered. "Show her the casket of Nern Forest Oak." "Yes," said Criddle. "It'll knock her sideways." Complete. Okay. Earlier tonight, well, it's not night anymore, but earlier in the evening, I just was like, I just didn't know if I would be able to live stream it after all. I didn't understand what was going on. And then I realized that maybe the reason it kept saying that the stream was upcoming was that maybe it was choosing a time on its own instead of letting me just stream automatically, and I need to be more watchful of that from now on. You would think by now I would remember to be careful about that and look to make sure it's not going to do something crazy. Because before I started this stream, it was actually wanting me to start the stream a minute before the time that I was already entering the information about it. So I had to change the time of it in order to even do the stream. But that's okay, because it did end up working out, thankfully. I wasn't even sure if it would. I thought, is it my connection? What's going on with this? And then there was this weird issue at one point, and I don't remember if it was yesterday. My stream actually worked or didn't work, but there was some sort of weird problem where it was the stream was going on, and my screen started flashing. It actually looked as though it went white for a second. It was really weird, and I didn't know what that was about, why it was doing that, and I was thinking, oh no, is that how that happens when a month ago when I had gotten that message claiming that YouTube had detected that I was doing a stream where there was someone doing the stream all by themselves, who was a minor, and I was like, no, that was me. I'm not a minor, I'm 33. And so I had to provide my age, but then they didn't tell me. They didn't tell me that they were just going to prevent me from streaming for the next 3 to 4 weeks. I didn't know how, if I would ever have streaming enabled again. So it's just, I keep getting scared like this. No. That it's somehow something crazy is going to happen, and it's there really isn't YouTube support like there used to be. It used to be easier to reach out to them and stuff, but no, it isn't. But anyway, enough about that. I don't remember what the next book was that I was planning on reading. But I think now I read all the English Zamonia books on stream. I think. I don't know for sure. I think so. I think that's all of them. Anyway. If you watched at any point during this, thank you. We're going to end the stream now. I did get really sleepy towards the end of this. I didn't expect to. That's actually only my second time reading it. There's just so much detail in that book that I can't remember everything. Anyway, it's still absolutely, I mean, it's really good though. Mhm. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and end the stream and go to sleep probably. Goodbye. I don't know what the book is next that I will read. I'll be reading something else sometime soon. Bye.